To preface this story, I love to drive, like hours-long drives to nowhere with no destination in mind. Just me, my music, and the road ahead of me. Living in Nebraska, I'd often take back roads or lonely highways cutting through the countryside to small towns, and eventually cities. And I'd usually take these drives at night, since there was far less traffic to worry about. I've done it since I've gotten my license, and I've never once had any sort of issue, nor have I ever run into any trouble. But that's something that I can't say anymore. For reference, I'm a relatively small 22-year-old female, and as I've stated before, I often take these drives completely and utterly alone. They're a good way to clear my head when I'm stressed, upset, or overwhelmed, or for me to get a plan together to sort personal issues out. I've also done these long and lonely drives to get away from the toxicity of my household when I used to live with my parents, as a means of coping with their alcoholism. Though now that I've moved out and am in a much better place mentally, I don't really have the urge to get in my car and just drive anymore. But on the night that this event took place, I was feeling pretty overwhelmed and anxious with a cluster of personal issues that I'd rather not get into. I felt restless and irritable around my boyfriend, couldn't focus on anything else, and decided that I would take a drive to clear my head. My boyfriend was understanding and told me to be careful and to not be gone for too terribly long since it was already pretty late. I agreed, gave him a kiss goodbye, and I left. I drove around our city for about 30 minutes, but I was still feeling on edge about everything transpiring in my personal life, so I decided to drive further north down those familiar, dark, winding one-lane highways. I kept the car at a steady 65 miles per hour, taking the turns at a slower pace in case a deer jumped out around the bend, and was just admiring the vast, empty darkness of the snow-capped fields and barren trees. It was honestly a bit creepy being all alone with no cars in sight, seemingly in the middle of nowhere. The few houses there are, miles back from the road, lightless, and the dead cornfields withered away and covered in snow. It was like something out of a horror movie, and I half expected to see a ghost pop up in my rearview mirror, or see someone clamber out from the patches of trees dotting the horizon. The only light came from my headlights, and even then, I still strained to see through the inky darkness of the night. By now, it was just after midnight, and I told myself that once I made the familiar roundabout that would either take you to a small town or back up towards the city, that I would head back home. That roundabout was still maybe 15-20 minutes away, but other than my imagination picturing the worst, I wasn't really all that concerned. I mean, I was by myself. I didn't have any other motorist to worry about. Right? Wrong. As I'm rounding another bend, I notice a vehicle with its hazards flashing, maybe a quarter of a mile or something away from me. It was some sort of sedan, dark-colored, and was angled to where only part of it was on the shoulder, while the rest jutted out into the road. Like whoever this was had to pull over in a hurry, but didn't quite manage to do that. The driver's side door was flung wide open, and as I slowed my vehicle down and angled it towards the opposite side of the road to pass, I could make out what looked like maybe blood on the inside of the door. I didn't see anyone on the road or in the car, and I was the only motorist in sight. Cell phone reception there is spotty at best, but more often than not, you couldn't get reception no matter how hard you prayed, which was definitely the case when I took a glance at my phone to see if I had any bars. So here I am, a lone female on the road at night, pulling up near a vacant vehicle that looks like someone had been attacked on the inside. All of that with no cell service. Now, I'm no dummy. I've watched countless episodes of Investigation Discovery and Criminal Minds, and I read far too many true crime books to know that this had bad and danger written all over it. But there was still a small part of me that worried something terrible had happened to whoever was in that vehicle, and I thought that I needed to help. These roads don't get a lot of traffic late at night, and temperatures were now well below freezing. If someone were hurt or in trouble, there was no one and nothing else to help them but me. Still, I erred on the side of caution. I was still driving my car, though a bit more slowly, and as I approached the vehicle, I rolled down my passenger window a bit, shut my music off, and called out, "Hey, anyone there?" Are you okay?" I didn't hear a response. I worried that whoever this was passed out somewhere, but I wasn't about to get out and look for them. I told myself that I'd call out one last time, and if I didn't hear anything, I would leave, and the moment there was reception, I'd call it in. And if I did hear someone, well, I'd figure out my next course of action then. So again, I shout, "Hey, what happened? Are you all right?" There was silence for a beat, and then I heard rustling in the shadows of the trees, followed by a gruff voice saying,
"Yeah."
I was relieved at first, and was about to say something in response or possibly even stop my car and get out, when I noticed three things nearly simultaneously. As I inched my way past the front of the sedan, I noticed there was no damage to the hood or anywhere else on the car, which I found to be strange considering the blood on the inside of the door. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glance of someone coming out from behind the sedan, and they were making a beeline towards my car. Fast. The person didn't have any blood on them or appear to be injured in any way. They were wearing a mask. Not like a face mask for COVID or a ski mask or anything normal, but one of those masks you would see in the Purge movies. And they were holding something in their hand. I don't know what it was. I couldn't get a good look, but from its length and shape, my guess was maybe a tire iron or a crowbar, something in that vein. I don't need to tell you that I slammed on the gas the moment I noticed those things and drove like a bat straight out of hell, my heart thundering in my chest and my entire body shaking. My window was still rolled down, and in my haste, the music was still shut off, so I could very clearly hear someone, definitely a man, shouting at me, though I had no clue what they were saying. I just knew that I had to get out of there immediately. I stole one last look in my rearview mirror as I drove off, mostly to see if they were getting in the car to follow or if they had stopped. The man with the weapon was still standing in the middle of the road watching me, and right before I looked away from the mirror, I saw a second man emerge from the trees that had been rustling earlier, also wearing one of those creepy masks. I probably broke every law for speeding that night, but I wanted to get as far away from those men as possible. As soon as I made it to the roundabout, I turned towards town, parked in the Walmart parking lot that thankfully still had cars from who I assumed were workers closing up shop, and then I proceeded to have a full-on meltdown. When I could pull myself together, I called one of my friends who was a police officer to tell him what had happened and ask what I should do. He was concerned for me, and after asking if I was okay, where I was I followed. He told me since it was out of city limits, he couldn't do much on his end, but he could get in contact with the local police and sheriff's department, and they'd take my statement and go to check it out. I agreed, thanked him, and while I waited for police to show up, I called my boyfriend. Through my hysterical sobs and panic, I managed to tell him what had happened not even 10 or so minutes ago. He was, as you could imagine, super freaked for my safety and wanted me to either come home immediately or drive down himself to take me home. I told him the police were on their way to take my statement, so I couldn't leave and that I was fine, but I stayed on the phone with him until I saw the familiar blue and red lights in my rear view. I gave the police my statement, and they assured me that they would go back to the spot that I told them the sedan had been at, just to take a look and to see if those guys were still around. Though with no dash cam to catch the license plate and no description of the men, I wasn't really sure what they'd be able to do. All they had to go off of was a dark-colored car and two guys with masks. After I gave my statement, I went home and stayed curled up close to my boyfriend the entire night, listening to every sound the house made in fear that it would somehow be those guys arriving to finish whatever they had started. Since the incident, I haven't heard back from police about whether or not they have any leads, and I'm not sure they ever will. I'm just thankful that I'm still here and I didn't stop my car or get out. I'm not sure what would have become of me if I had. I still have so many questions that have no answers. What were they doing out there? Why? Was that blood on the inside of the car? Or just a ruse to get more attention? If it really was blood, had they hurt someone else? What would have happened to me if I had stopped my car? Needless to say, I won't be going on any more late night drives to nowhere. and I hope that I never cross paths with whoever those freaks were, ever again. This is hands down the wildest, most unsettling thing that's ever happened to me. It still doesn't feel entirely real, even though it's been almost a year. I've told a few close friends, and even they looked at me like, "Are you sure you didn't dream that?" But no, I lived it. And to this day, I have no idea how I didn't notice sooner. It started off small, stupid little things going missing in my apartment. Nothing dramatic. At first, it was a protein bar that I swore I'd left on the counter. Then it was one sock from a clean pair that I'd just folded. Another time, the volume on my TV was higher than I usually keep it. And I figured maybe I just sat on the remote. Like I said, minor stuff. Easy to write off. And that's exactly what I did. Chalked it up to forgetfulness. I mean, I live alone. Quiet neighborhood. Middle of the suburbs. Not exactly the setting for some horror story. But then, more stuff started to feel off. My TV would be left on a different input that I remembered. I always shut everything down the same way before bed. It's just my routine. So when I came home from work and saw it switch to HDMI 3 instead of HDMI 1, my brain did this weird little spin. It wasn't just the TV though. Sometimes my kitchen light would be left on when I swore that I'd turned it off. Or the bathroom mirror would have small streaks on it, like someone had wiped the fog off, even though I hadn't taken a hot shower that day. Still, I kept telling myself the same thing. You're tired. You probably forgot. It's nothing. But that's when the sounds came. My house is a bit older, so it's always had a bit of character. Creaky floorboards, pipes that groan when the heat kicks on, all of that. But I started hearing these dull, heavy bumps in the ceiling above my hallway. It wasn't like every night, just now and then. But usually when it was late, when everything else was quiet. I figured I might have raccoons or squirrels or something. Houses make noise, no big deal. But one night, I just couldn't ignore it anymore. I got home late from work, maybe close to midnight. I walked into my house like usual, tossed my keys into the bowl by the door, and headed to the kitchen for a snack. As I walked down the hallway, I glanced up toward the attic access panel. You know, the one with the little pull string attached to the ceiling. And just for a split second, I could have sworn that I saw movement behind the vent near it. There was a shadow, but I could tell that something had shifted. I stopped walking. I stared. I don't know what I was expecting, but I got nothing. Just silence. I must have stood there for a full minute, trying to convince myself that it was only my imagination. I told myself I was overtired. Maybe a car drove by outside and cast a weird shadow through the window. At that point, I forgot all about the snack. I forced myself to go to bed, but the idea dug in and it just refused to leave. So the next day, I ordered a motion-activated camera off of Amazon. Just one of those cheap little things you can hook up with an app on your phone. It didn't feel like paranoia. It felt more like I needed to prove to myself that I was just being weird. I set it up in the hallway and angled it right at the attic door. I even tested it with my phone to make sure it worked. Then I went on about my life. 2 nights later, I wake up to a phone notification. 2:17 a.m. Motion detected. My heart immediately started racing. I was lying in bed in the dark, staring at my screen, dreading what I was about to see. But I had to. I tapped the clip. At first, it was just my empty hallway. But that's when the attic panel swung open. A hand appeared, gripping the edge of the opening. Then a leg. Then a whole person, carefully climbing down the ladder, barefoot, moving slowly and deliberately, like they'd done this 100 times before. They touched the floor, looked around, and walked out of frame toward the kitchen. I stopped the video there. I was now frozen, because I knew for a fact that there was another person in my house. That clip was live, so they were still there, maybe 20 feet away from me, separated by a single door. I grabbed the closest thing I could find, some aluminum baseball bat that I kept near the bed for just-in-case situations. I then tiptoed to the door and locked myself in the room. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely dial 911. Cops showed up in under 10 minutes. I have a digital lock on my front door, and because I wasn't leaving my bedroom before they got here, I gave that code to the dispatcher, and the police were able to let themselves in. Once inside, that was when I felt safe enough to come out of my bedroom. I explained everything, and they did a sweep of the house. Of course, unexpectedly, they didn't find anything in the downstairs portion of my house. But when they checked the attic, that's when it all clicked. There was a whole setup up there. A rolled-out sleeping bag, a backpack filled with half-eaten snacks, a few water bottles, even some paperback books. Someone had definitely been living up there. And they found him too, trying to hide himself in the far-off corner of the attic itself. Apparently, this guy was a neighbor's adult son, someone that I didn't know personally, but had seen a couple of times through my time living here. Word was he'd struggled with drug use and mental health issues, and had been ultimately kicked out of his parents' house months earlier. Apparently, he broke into my house while I was away on vacation back in October, and just never left. He quietly lived up there, sneaking down only at night to eat, watch TV, whatever he really wanted actually. The reason the bathroom mirror looked used or why the kitchen light was on, that was all him, walking around while I was asleep. That night he got arrested, I moved out 3 weeks later. Even now, I can't fully wrap my head around it. The idea that I was living under the same roof as someone else, completely unknowingly, for months, still makes my skin crawl. What messes with me the most is how subtle it all was. He didn't steal anything major. He didn't make a mess. He was careful, strategic. I probably would never have known if I hadn't seen that shadow by the vent. That tiny, fleeting moment turned out to be the crack in the illusion that I needed in order to figure out what was really going on. I've developed this weird sensitivity to noise now. I used to love total silence at night, but ever since that happened, silence really freaks me out. I keep a white noise machine running, and I leave a light on in the hallway. I can't stand that creeping feeling of, what was that sound? Because now I know, it's not always just the house settling. People always ask why I didn't notice something sooner, and honestly, I don't know. I think we trust our spaces too much. We believe our homes are safe because they're ours. But now, I second-guess everything. Every little sound, every flicker on the baby monitor. Yes, I have one now, and I don't even have a baby. I don't feel crazy. I just feel hyper-aware. Living alone used to feel like freedom. Now, it feels like something that I have to triple-check. And this is still something that I think about every time I hear a bump in the ceiling. I'm going to start this off with a bit of a trigger warning. This story involves violence, drug use, and even a bit of animal abuse. So don't act like I didn't try to warn you. I've been needing to get this off my chest. What happened between October 2017 and early 2019. It's been sitting heavy with me for quite some time. A little backstory first though, just to give context. I graduated high school in 2016. At the time, I wasn't working. Not because I wasn't trying, but because nothing really panned out. I had a few interviews, but they didn't lead anywhere. Honestly, I was too anxious to apply even at the local supermarkets, since most of the people who bullied me in high school worked there. The idea of seeing them every day made me shut down. So instead of working, I just stuck close to the few friends that I had. I wasn't very social during school. I had a long-term girlfriend early on, and I put most of my energy into that relationship instead of building a friend group. When we broke up near graduation, I realized I didn't really have anyone left, except for one person. Sam. Sam had been my best friend all through school. He had a good job, a supportive family, money, and a decent group of friends. My parents liked him and thought that he was a good influence on me. He didn't drink or do drugs, and I really looked up to him. So when Sam asked me to move in with him, I didn't hesitate for an instant. He'd found a rental through a family friend at a small real estate agency. It was overpriced and run down, but we didn't know any better. Our parents were eager to have us out of the house. His family figured that he was doing well enough to live independently, and my stepdad was tired of supporting me while I wasn't working. We ended up moving in with one of Sam's childhood friends. We'll call this guy Blake. I'd never met Blake before, and he was hardly around the house because he worked a lot and spent most weekends dirt biking. Things were fine for a while, until the first major blow-up. One night, Blake got home at around 2:30 a.m. Ready to crash, he walked into his room to find two random teenagers hooking up on his bed. Sam had apparently let them stay there without telling Blake. Blake packed up and left the very next day. As far as I know, Sam and Blake never spoke again. Now, let's get into the real story, starting February of 2018. By this time, I'd finally gotten a job through my dad. I was enjoying the routine of working and being out of the house. But Sam had started acting off. He wasn't leaving for work before me like he used to. He was snappy all the time, moody, and he would leave the house at all hours without saying where he was going. Now, I'm nobody's parent. I'm not trying to watch over anyone, but it would still have been nice to know. Turns out, he was cheating on his girlfriend with a girl from our high school. It was around this time that when Sam was in a bad mood, he'd start making threats, like saying he'd throw all my stuff out on the street if I didn't do exactly what he asked. Clean the house, run errands, basically whatever he felt like. Now, I didn't own much, just a mattress and my desktop computer. He never actually followed through, but that was likely because I didn't ever really push back. I just kept my head down. But things started to get weirder. He started stealing my clothes, even though they didn't fit him, and he would hand me his shirts afterwards, like it was some sort of weird exchange program. It was like he needed to control even the littlest of things. He also stopped cooking, started living off of fast food, using a gas credit card that his dad had given him. So for months, it was 2 fast food meals a day, until his dad shut that down. After that, it was McDonald's and 2-liter bottles of iced coffee every night. At first, I figured whatever he was doing wasn't my business. But then he couldn't pay rent or bills and asked me to cover for him. When I refused, he'd guilt trip me or physically block my room. Now, I was already anxious from how angry and aggressive he'd become, so I gave in. A lot. And it started hurting me financially. Eventually, Sam stopped working altogether. He told me one day, work let me go early, and said they'd call if they needed me again. I told him that's not how jobs really work, and we argued about it. It took him 10 weeks to finally call his job back, only to learn that they'd marked him as having abandoned the position. Even after all of this, I still tried to support him the way that he had supported me during my rough patch, but instead of appreciating it, he'd lash out, yell at me, tell me that I had a problem with always being right in the most venomous of ways. With all his new free time, he started inviting that girl from high school over constantly. He told me to keep it a secret from his girlfriend, but I couldn't do that. I was close with her. Now, while I hardly ever saw that other girl myself, I did my best to avoid the house as much as possible. I later found out that she was at our house nearly every day, sometimes multiple times a day. That's when Sam started bringing the pets in. Sam's family gave him a bird. He went out and bought a dog named Sparta. Then he bought a kitten for that girl that he was cheating with. They named her Skittles. That kitten eventually ran away, so he bought another one and gave it the same name. But what he did to that kitten makes me sick to this day. When the girl or I weren't home, he'd lock the cat in the closet and only feed it when he remembered to. I tried to help, feeding her whenever he wasn't around, but he eventually noticed. One day, he actually caught me feeding the cat. That's when he slammed me into the wall and screamed that I was poisoning his animals. Then he hit me, hard, before walking off like nothing ever happened. Another day, I came home and the bird was gone. Sam wasn't home either. When I happened to ask him about it later, he told me that the bird had fallen over in its cage and broken its neck. That was the first real time that I felt panic. This wasn't just someone who was sad or struggling. Something was very clearly wrong. Later that night, Sam came home carrying a shoebox. I thought that he was finally going to bury the bird. But it wasn't the bird in the box. It was the kitten. According to Sam, she broke her neck jumping around in the closet. And I'll never forget the way that he said it. No sadness, no anger, just plain emptiness. His eyes were completely hollow. He walked back into his room and locked the door behind him. I didn't see him for nearly a week after that. Then came the final straw. I got home late one night after working overtime. Sam thought I was out for the night. I walked in to find him and the girl from high school doing coke in our living room. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. But by then, Sam was unrecognizable. Over the past 6 months, he had screamed at me, stolen from me, physically assaulted me, and made me feel like everything that went wrong, including the deaths of his bird and cat, were somehow my fault. That night, I heard him bragging, lying, making fun of me, using every piece of high school nostalgia in order to impress this girl. Well, the next day, I told Sam's girlfriend everything. I took Sparta, the dog, because he was clearly malnourished and abused, even though I'd been feeding him in secret. I contacted the SPCA, sent them photos of the house, and reported the abuse. I timed everything with a scheduled house inspection so someone else would be there just in case Sam lost it. I thought it was a solid plan. That day, I was actually busy with everything when I saw a car pull up in front of the house. I immediately thought that it was our landlord, so that was my cue to get things rolling. I'd learned very quickly after this that that wasn't our landlord at all. I went to grab my phone from the room because I had already had my claims typed out, and all I had to do was hit send. Follow that up with the case manager I was assigned, and the ball would be in motion. But as I walked out of the room and into the hallway, I came face to face with Sam, shirtless, reeking of weed and alcohol. He slammed me against the wall with one hand, holding a long kitchen knife in the other. He screamed. I shook. I couldn't get words out. When I told him where I'd taken Sparta, he screamed at me, wanting to know where his dog was. I shook. I couldn't get words out. When I told him where I'd taken Sparta, he choked me and ran the flat side of the knife down my arm. Everything started to go blurry, like I was beginning to black out. And it kept getting more intense. He was screaming that I betrayed him, that it was my fault his girlfriend had dumped him. He then pressed the knife near my neck, and at that moment, I thought I was going to die. I whispered, "My friends can hear you." See, I always left Discord open on my desktop in my room, and he knew that. He hesitated, but then let go. I ran straight to my car, didn't look back once. I spent a few days at my parents' place after, sleeping on the couch, too scared to explain anything. They called me Jumpy. I told them I just missed them. Sam messaged me asking to talk. I obliged. We met in public. He said that he was moving back in with his parents because he couldn't support himself anymore, and the house had too many bad memories for him. That was August 2018. I haven't seen him since. Once I told mutual friends what had happened, along with the girl that he'd been seeing, people from our old school cut ties with him completely. I filed a police report. I didn't press charges, but I told them I never wanted to see the guy again. I was told restraining orders cost money, and that wasn't something that I could afford at the time. But at least our last incident was documented. After he left, I moved back into the house on my own. He left everything, furniture, bedding, all of it, except for his PS4, headphones, and TV. I was now living alone in the house where my best friend had nearly killed me. I stopped talking to my friends. I started having nightmares. The aftermath from late 2018 through early 2019 was just as dark, maybe darker. The isolation, the guilt over the animals, the trauma of everything I'd seen, that all stayed with me. I still have photos of the house and of Sparta. I can post them here if people ever doubt what actually happened. In late 2019, I met my current girlfriend, and she's incredible. We just bought a house together and are moving in 2 weeks. Right now, we're both staying with my parents, but the move has brought back all of these memories. I haven't seen Sam in more than 6 years now, but I'm still scared of him. Still cautious. Although telling the story feels like a step forward. Like I'm finally closing that chapter of my life, on that house, and everything that happened inside of it. This happened back in 2017, when I was around 18 and living in a dorm in Kyiv. The dorm was in the worst possible place that you could put students, tucked inside a quiet neighborhood surrounded by 9-floor apartment buildings, with strollers out front and elderly women sitting on benches. Not exactly ideal. Logistics were awful too, especially at night, with our nearest metro station being about a half-hour walk away. It was exam season, and I was just finishing my second year. I'd been up studying non-stop, running on all-nighters and a fridge full of Red Bull. What can I say? German was brutal. Well, one night, in the middle of cramming, I got this unbearable craving for Dutch stroopwafels. My brain had clearly snapped from too much caffeine and too little sugar, along with sleep. I knew I needed a break, a walk, and a cigarette. My roommates were already asleep, and my best friend was still buried knee-deep in her textbooks. So I grabbed my wallet and my cigarette case, because priorities, and went out, alone, at 1:30 a.m. Yeah, I know, but honestly, it wasn't that unusual. We went out late all the time. This wasn't the safest neighborhood, but it wasn't the worst either. Maybe second or third worst. So I hit the streets. Important side note though, our dorm had a curfew. After midnight, the doors would lock automatically, and the only way to get back inside was to be buzzed in from the inside. Most often by this grumpy dorm lady who was on duty, although she'd usually be asleep, even though she was paid to work nights. I once knew someone who had to wait 15 minutes outside in freezing January, and still got yelled at for coming home late. Anyway, this was a warm and quiet night in May. I put in my headphones, lit a cigarette, and walked to the nearest 24/7 store, the ATB. It wasn't fancy, but it was only about a 10-minute walk away. I'm walking down the street when a man catches my eye. He was standing at a bus stop near the store, which in and of itself was a bit weird. Buses had stopped running over an hour earlier, and the next one wouldn't come until almost 6 a.m. I figured he was either drunk, homeless, or just hanging out in a visible spot waiting for a taxi. Well, to get to the store, I had to use the underground crossing near the bus stop. There was no convenient alternative unless I wanted to take a huge detour. My stroopwafel craving was winning, so I went for it. Yeah, I know, again. But before heading down the stairs, I looked back at the man, and 3 things seemed to hit me all at once. 1, he didn't look homeless. His clothes weren't fancy, but they were clean and fit properly. His face was clean shaven, and he looked normal. 2, he didn't seem drunk or high. He stood steadily, no bottles nearby, and his eyes looked completely sober, alert even. 3, and this was the most troubling. He was staring directly at me. He didn't blink, his eyes didn't shift, just this intense, focused stare, like he was trying to memorize everything about me. That's when he nodded. I nodded back as you typically would when greeting someone, and then I went off to get my waffles. The guy didn't follow me into the underground crossing, but when I looked back one last time, he was still standing there staring. After I got my snack, I honestly had forgotten about him. I had much bigger things on my mind, namely my German exam the next morning. So I started to walk back to my dorm the same way that I came. It didn't hit me that he might still be there until I saw him again. Same spot, same relentless stare. And now my gut was absolutely screaming. I picked up my pace, tried not to look directly at him, lit another cigarette in efforts to just calm my nerves. That's when I heard footsteps coming from behind me. I told myself maybe he just decided to go home at the same time. But why now? Why wait until I passed him? Why follow me onto a quiet, dimly lit street? I sped up my pace, and so did he. The street was now empty, and I still had about 5 minutes to go before I hit my door. It was nearly 2 a.m. My hands were full of waffles, and my gut was now full of panic. I was about to run when I heard him behind me. "Excuse me, miss, don't be scared. You dropped your cigarettes." I was exhausted though, sleep deprived, panicking, but I did glance back. The guy was holding a cigarette pack, Winston's, the exact brand that I smoked, and this caused me to slow down. But then I remembered something. I didn't carry packs of cigarettes. I had a cigarette case. I specifically had it because not only was it cool, but there were only room for 10 cigarettes. It helped me limit how much I smoked. And that night was no exception. I left my dorm with only my case. I never had a pack. So where the hell did that come from? In my momentary pause, this man's now smiling at me. And while he's now walking toward me, it's at an unsettlingly fast pace. When my mind kicked back into gear, I turned and ran. Of course, he ran too, and this made my heart drop. I couldn't even scream. I just saved my breath and kept going. For what it's worth, I'm not a very good runner. He was fast, and the distance between us shrank with every second, and my panic was now full blown. I knew there was a long, dark stretch of road leading to the dorm. No streetlights, no cover, and likely no one to help. Even if I made it to the door, I'd be stuck outside waiting to be buzzed in. There'd be no time to call anyone, and I knew that I'd be caught. I turned back once, and he was still smiling. That smile was all wrong, like he was enjoying this chase. He never said another word, just ran behind me in total silence with that same focused stare, coupled with an ear-to-ear grin. I was convinced that I was about to die. But right before that final stretch, I saw someone. At first, I thought it was another man working with him, but then I recognized his face. It was Alex, a third-year student from the dorm. Thank God. I ran straight up to him, screaming something like, "Alex, stop, please stop." He stopped, turned, and looked at me. The man chasing slowed down. I didn't stop until I was around Alex's arm. I begged him to walk with me to the dorm. I was terrified that that man would sprint again after a short break, but instead, all he did was wave at me. Not a cool wave, but this clumsy, childlike flap of the hand, almost like a toddler trying to say bye-bye. Then he turned around and ran off. Alex and I rushed into the dorm. I tried my best to explain what had happened, though I'm not sure what I said made much sense. Alex was cool enough that he didn't ask questions. He just walked with me inside. I never did see that smiling man again. I lived in those dorms for 2 more years. Never once spotted him though. Although I was shaken, please believe I still ate my waffles. And after that, I bought pepper spray. I never had to use it, but to this day it still helps me feel safer. Now, this is just a scary story that I tell friends or awkward Tinder dates when the silence gets too weird. But one thing about it still bothers me. That cigarette pack. Winston's. Exactly what I smoked. How did he have them? And as much as I rack my brain, there are only 2 real possibilities. Either 1, it was a total coincidence. Or he saw me put out my cigarette before going into the underground crossing. He picked up the butt and went and bought the exact same brand while I was in the store. I know that the latter sounds far-fetched, but if that's what happened, then that thought honestly scares the hell out of me. This happened nearly 15 years ago now. I'm a male, and at the time of this story, I was 15 years old, about 5'5" and 132 pounds. I was a wrestler, so I always knew my exact weight and kept myself extremely lean, but I still had a fairly muscular build. I lived in a relatively small town of around 50, maybe 60,000 people, and in my off-season, I did whatever I could to be somewhat active and outside. I had a friend, we'll call him B, who was really into disc golf and always asked me to come play with him and smoke a joint while we were in the more secluded parts of the course. He was a few years older than me, but no bigger than I was, and not exactly a great influence on me at the time. The small town that I lived in only had 2 disc golf courses, one at a very public park near a middle school, or the one at the edge of the town in an older park that was much, much bigger. Obviously, we weren't smoking for everyone else to see, so the edge of town, sealed off park it was. Little did I know that on Thursday afternoons, this park happened to be my town spot for gay men to meet and hook up in the parking lot. I live in the Midwest of the United States, so these were not your stylish, young, pretty boys. It was mostly guys aged 30 to 50 who were pretty big and aggressive yeehaw looking. So me and my friend finished the course and the joint. Walking out of the woods, we were anything but sober. We typically either just chilled in the grass or played catch after we finished up until my buddy was more normal and ready to drive us back. We noticed that there were way more cars in the parking lot than when we got there, and a lot of older guys sitting on trunks of their cars or on tailgates, loosely grouped together. This very large hairy man in a tank top and his tall, thin friend dressed like a biker gang member started to do wolf whistles toward me and my friend. I'm not gonna lie, I got pretty uncomfortable. Not because gay men whistled at me, but because we had to walk in their direction and I could feel the eyes of way more guys on me than I wanted. For a testosterone-filled weight room junkie teenager, I didn't feel very safe here knowing that there were at least 30 guys in this group, and I could see in my peripheral that a fairly large portion were eyeing us closely as we walked toward the parking lot. I'll make it clear right now that I'm not a fighter, and I would never intend to hurt anyone aside from self-defense, but I was definitely confident in myself to hold someone off. Us two were just so outnumbered and not in the right state of mind, so anxiety made things a whole lot worse. A couple of the guys said some gross catcall-like things, more whistles, and that "whew" noise that rednecks make when they're excited about something, or instigating. I think they had the idea that we were some people they met online and were coming to meet up. Being high, I didn't care what was going on. I just wanted to be safe and not the center of attention. Once we got closer, that big hairy man who did the first catcall said something like, "You think you could handle this?" I just mumbled, "No thanks," and tried to keep walking. He yelled back, "What was that, boy?" To which I said more clearly, "No thanks, I'm not into that." He seemed offended and angrily said, "Not into what?" All I could get out was, "Sorry, I'm not gay." And he seemed to be offended by the word gay, again asking me to repeat myself in a very aggressive tone. So I corrected myself and said, "I'm not a homosexual." Things escalated from there real quick. The man stepped forward from leaning against a truck and grabbed my wrist. He said, "Well, we can fix that. Don't get excited. I didn't do some cool fight move to attack him. Just a simple wrist roll, and using that momentum, a quick push of the elbow to turn him around so that he would have his back to me, and I could get by without anything more." He said, "Touch me like that again, and we'll get the both of you." Another guy made his way over to B, who was much less the calm and chill type of stoner that I was. I can only describe what he did as one of those kicks or sidesteps off a wall, but to that guy's chest, abdomen area. He then ran off while yelling, "Get f***ed, man." Very quickly, bunches of guys began to stand up from their seats on the outside of their cars and motion our direction. I started booking it for the car too, and Mr. Skinny Biker Man was running right after us. Thank God it was just him running, and not multiple guys chasing us, or this story might end up a bit different. I was faster than B, so I got ahead of him, and picture us running across a parking lot to his truck that was facing us, backed into a stall. I got around to the passenger side quickly, with B still about 100 feet from the truck. He tried to cut to the right and make it to the driver's side of his little S10, but Skinny cut him off and sent him to the passenger side. I ran around the back of the truck as fast as I could to the driver door, and B slid his keys across the roof to me. I hopped in, well aware that I didn't want to be driving right now in this state of mind, much less in such a crazy situation, and even more less in someone else's vehicle. Still, without thinking, I started it and skirted out of the parking lot while Skinny banged on the bed of the truck chasing. But that's not the end. A truck and a car are on their way right behind me. Skinny jumped into the car that was in the back, and that's when the chase began. Terrified, and still high, mind you, I cut through the grass of the park to get to the main road more quickly, thinking I would lose them that way. These guys raced right over the speed bumps and around the bends in the park road right up to the main road, and they were driving so fast that I would have gotten T-boned if I didn't smash the pedal to the floor at the right time. I'm so stressed that I start silently crying while driving, thinking of how horrible the possibilities could be. Any contact wearers in the audience know that when your eyes are dry, like from the smoke, then they rapidly get moist, contacts tend to drift a bit until they find their place again. This definitely wasn't ideal for someone with awful vision driving twice the speed limit down a road in the middle of town. So I started turning down residential streets, weaving in and out, being tapped on the shoulder by B to keep my speed up, because the two were still right on our rear bumper. I even made some risky U-turns, and they followed right along. This chase lasted over 10 minutes of me frantically driving through main streets, residential roads, back alleys, and everything else that I could to try to get away. I was so scared that the best case scenario ended in us getting pulled over and myself obtaining a permanent record for DUI at the ripe age of 15. But a stroke of luck and a surprisingly quick reflex came to my aid. B yelled, "Cop," and pointed to a parking lot to our left, where there was a police cruiser probably just waiting to catch someone speeding or running red lights on the semi-busy road we ended up on. I whipped it into the parking lot and parked a couple stalls down from the cop. The truck prepared to turn but stopped right in the middle of the road. So once the person behind him realized what was going on, that car following him had to swerve and popped a curb. This caught the officer's attention. He backed out, and the two vehicles split different ways and were out of sight before the cop even got out of the lot. I never went back to that park any time other than the mornings after that. I'm so thankful that nothing bad came of that incident, and we made it out completely unscathed. No idea what those guys would have done, but people engaging teenagers in a car chase probably don't have the best intentions in mind. Funny enough, or whatever the opposite is, this was actually my first time in life being sexually harassed too. You would think being in a car chase might be fun or exciting, but I just felt so powerless, like I had no control, like nothing I could do would both get these guys away from us and simultaneously not get me arrested. By some divine twist of fate, not only did we get away from those guys, but nobody had to call their parents from the police station, or worse. Pretty much a win on all fronts. Even though I'm well into adulthood now, this still makes up one of the strangest encounters I've ever had, and I find myself thinking about it every now and again. I don't really know what we could have done to avoid the situation, save for not disc golfing that day. I don't feel like we invited that attention, and we certainly tried not to feed into it. Things still escalated though, and anytime I'm back in my hometown now, I steer clear of all parks on Thursdays. At age 12, I started babysitting for family friends who had 3 daughters ages 4 to 7. They lived in a cul-de-sac where nearly every home housed a young couple with children in elementary school. The neighborhood was extremely close-knit. Picture the 1950s American block party communities. They had a communal policy on using one another's toys. Any kid could use a play structure in someone else's yard anytime without ever asking. Shortly after I started working in the neighborhood, they revised the rule to anytime a family is not using a babysitter to watch their kids, to ensure I wouldn't get overwhelmed supervising a swarm of kids that I wasn't paid to watch. It was thus more or less known when parents were going out and leaving someone else in charge of their kids. I was welcome to take the girls to play in any other yard as they wanted. Their parents even gave me permission to let them play in someone else's yard or sandbox independently if I needed a short break. Being an avid Babysitters Club reader, I didn't leave the girls outside unsupervised ever. I would wait until someone else wanted a water or bathroom break and then corral everyone inside temporarily. Similarly, when the girls wanted to play in the treehouse owned by an older couple a few doors up the street, I climbed up, despite a slight fear of heights, and crouched in the little house with them, despite feelings of claustrophobia, in order to follow my own rule. I don't recall whether my everyone inside, everyone outside together rule preceded the first odd interaction I had with the immediate next door neighbor or not, but when the police questioned the girls I babysat years later, they said nothing bad ever happened when I watched them because I set up that weird, sometimes annoying rule. One day while playing basketball with the girls in the driveway, that next door neighbor came outside in a baseball cap and sunglasses and sat down on his second-story deck to read a paperback book. I later noticed that he'd turned his chair 180 degrees to face us, as well as the basketball hoop. I couldn't tell if he was looking at us. He had no reaction to me staring at him, flipping pages in the book like someone would when reading. This behavior repeated every time we played basketball for the 5 years that I watched those girls. Eventually, it got to the point when I noticed him in the chair, accessories on. I would suggest a game that we could play inside or in the front yard, well out of his view. This strange neighbor was familiar to me as he went to my church. I'd never seen someone kneel in a pew, head bowed and hands folded, with the same level of intensity before or since. Once when my family was seated behind him, the priest came over to ask me to lead the children's mass during the homily because the usual person was out sick. This guy turned around and glared at me, like I personally set out to interrupt his prayer time. When I worked in the church nursery during various masses, I would often make eye contact with him as he waited in line outside the nursery door to use the restroom. From what I gleaned from our family, friends, and other people in the neighborhood, the odd basketball observer was a nice guy who gave up his apartment and job in the city to move in with and care for his sick, elderly mother. Since everyone thought this guy was great, and since he went to church, keep in mind this was well before the Catholic sex scandal broke, I figured I was in the wrong for finding him creepy. Even as young as 12, I was used to guys in their 40s or 50s asking me to go somewhere with them, or driving by slowly as I walked, biked, or jogged, just to make lewd comments. I figured I was projecting those experiences onto this awkward, quiet guy who was doing nothing wrong. For instance, I was certain that if the guy next door was a creep, he wouldn't miss the opportunity to watch with his sunglasses on and book in hand while the kids and I went swimming each summer when the family opened their above-ground pool. But he never set foot out on his deck when the kids and I donned swimsuits to play in the pool or backyard. I was more convinced that I was conceited and mean. Then, when I was 15 or 16, I caught him looking in the window as I cleaned up after movie night. The girls and I put on a film after bath time, and instead of watching it theater style in total darkness, we kept some lights on so I could braid the girls' hair. The big screen TV we used for movies was located in an addition on the house with floor-to-ceiling windows. Though my parents were OCD about shutting blinds and curtains when the sun went down to prevent people from seeing in, our family friends had no window treatments on the big modern windows. When I turned off the last light in the room, the floor lamp right next to a window facing the neighbor's house, I could see into the darkness outside, where that weird man sat on his deck in a chair in line with the window I was looking through. I looked over my shoulder and realized he had a direct line of sight on where the girls and I sat on the floor during the movie. As I looked back towards the house, I got a glimpse of him hustling inside. I would have doubted I'd seen him at all if he had not left the chair in an unusual spot. After watching him turn the chair around to read during many a basketball match, I knew where the chair sat that night, facing the window into the family room. That was not the chair's usual position on that deck. After that incident, I would suggest playing board games in another room or insist on watching movies theater style to ensure that he couldn't peep on what we did that night. Once the girls were asleep, I avoided the family room entirely because I was paranoid about being watched. If I wasn't in the kitchen doing homework or reading, away from all windows, I'd walk around the original first floor footprint of the house, where all the windows had curtains. The first time the parents noticed my change in routine, they insisted I could watch TV or movies in the family room. I didn't mention anything to them because I was worried my concerns were silly. When I was 17, my family heard an evening cable news story about a man in our town caught in a police sting operation, one in which a woman pretended to prostitute her 2-year-old. When they raided his house, the police found a ton of CP on his computer. Our family friends called a couple weeks later. They wanted to know how I knew the man next door to them wasn't safe. That was the guy I'd heard about on TV. As they described it, the police found his blog where he wrote about his obsession with one of the girls who lived next door to him. It detailed his fantasies involving her and his plans to act on them. Things like lying in the treehouse for hours, hoping to corner her when she climbed up alone to play. Many of his entries focused on taking advantage of or kidnapping the girl while the babysitter was in charge. In his head, babysitters were like the ones in old movies, talking to friends on the phone or making out with a boy they invited over instead of caring for the kids. As it became clear that I did neither one of those things, his plans evolved into killing the babysitter before taking the girl and getting the hell out of Dodge. After talking to the girls to ensure that they weren't victims, the police suggested I might know something to have acted the way that I did. All the pieces, the frequent run-ins at the church when I had children in my care, or the weird things he did when he knew I was watching the kids next door, all fit together seamlessly. I was relieved that I wasn't mean-spirited or imagining things. I was perhaps conceited. The focus was not on me, but on the kids, although I wasn't crazy for noticing. I recognize I wasn't the person most at risk in the situation, and yet, suburb pedo and would-be murderer, I can only pray that we never meet again. This is an ongoing situation, and I'm going to be honest, I don't really know what to do about it. My house sits fairly far back from the road, around 150 feet roughly, maybe a little further. Between the entrance to my driveway and my front porch, I have 3 vehicles parked that would obscure the view from anyone walking or driving by. I live out in the country, on a side road with no stores or anything along it or nearby. So someone getting lost looking for an address or something out here is unlikely. There's really no reason to be here at all unless you know someone, and while the road's a couple miles long, there's only 6 houses on it because it's an agricultural area with wide gaps between neighbors. No streetlights, literally almost pitch black out here at night. About a week ago, I was waiting for the mom of the boy that I sit to come pick him up. It was still pretty light out, maybe 7 p.m., so we were just about to hit twilight. When the kid's mom came to get him, she and I were talking outside the car for a minute while he was finishing a match on Apex, when we both heard a noise that sounded like someone trying to stifle a cough. This came from the kiwi orchard bordering my house. I thought it was our kid because he tries to jump scare me all the time lately, despite stealth not exactly being in his wheelhouse. So coughing or laughing when he's setting up to try to get me and giving away his position is quite the common thing. So I paid exactly 0 attention to it. But a couple of minutes later, he came flying out of my front door, and they left. I didn't even realize it until later that was weird because who the was coughing in the orchard? But at the time it was just, it didn't even register. Well, later that night, I'm sitting outside on my front porch smoking. It was sometime between midnight and 1 a.m. My lighter was dead, so I lit my cigarette in the house on my stove, then ran outside with it. I was sitting with my back to the road smoking. I had no porch lights on. My phone was on the dimmest screen setting because I didn't want to entice the mosquitoes. About halfway through my smoke, a man spoke up from somewhere near me and asked if he could have a cigarette. It surprised me so much that I nearly froze. I literally thought that an ad had popped up in a background tab on my phone or something like that. Then he said it again. So I turned around and he was right behind me. This dude was tall, like really tall, somewhere between 6'4" and 6'7". Beard, long hair, barefoot, wearing maybe blue or gray pants, no shirt, and a long-ass coat. Or maybe it was a robe. Kind of hard to tell in the dark, even though I had turned my phone flashlight on. When I say he was close, 5, maybe 6 feet away from me, and that's at most, like 2 steps, and he could have had his hands on me. I didn't know what to do or what to say. My heart was pounding, so I just pulled out my pack, and when he started to step forward, I said, "Nope, stop. You don't need to do that. Here." And I just tossed him the whole damn thing. When I told him to stop, he did. But, like, weird, he stopped and put his hands up to chest height, palms out, and he said,
"That was a good idea to toss it."
Then he just stood there for a second. I was racking my brain to figure out something to say, and before I had the chance, this weird MF backed away. Like, he walked backwards, back towards the road, to where I couldn't see him any longer. I didn't hear footsteps after that though, so I don't know if he kept walking or just stopped. I also have no clue how the fuck he got so close to me, or where he came from, or how he even knew I was smoking, unless he was nearby enough to smell it or something, because it's not like he heard me light it. I'd never seen this man before this evening. I've heard noises coming from around my house every single night since though. Not like right up on my house or where my cameras would catch him, but like noises in the orchard, near the canal, still far too close for comfort. I'm not sure what to do. I asked the sheriff to patrol out here if they could, but they're almost never out this way, and I can't exactly report him if I don't know where he is, or if he's doing anything to be reported for. It creeped me the fuck out though, and I have a weird feeling about the dude, although I don't really know what I can do about it. I work at the front desk at a hotel, and for the most part, things are usually pretty uneventful. It's typically just a mix of business travelers, tired families, and the occasional wedding party. But every now and then, you get someone who just makes your skin crawl. And last night was one of those. It was about 15 minutes before the end of my shift. I was talking to our maintenance guy about a local comedy club that's just a few blocks from the hotel. He asked if I recognized any of the comedians that were performing this week. So I pulled up their website, scanned the lineup, and told him I didn't recognize any of the names. Nothing crazy here, just small talk while I got ready to close out my shift. I was just about to start printing off my nightly paperwork when something strange happened. Both of us, at the exact same moment, looked up, and there was this man standing right in front of the desk, just staring right at us. I hadn't seen or heard him approach at all. He was right in front of me, but because my monitor sits up higher and I'm pretty short, I hadn't noticed him until he was already there. This man had some seriously off energy about him. He didn't just look at us. He studied us, like we were part of some puzzle that he was trying to solve. When, out of nowhere, he says, "What famous guy were you surprised she didn't know?" It took me a second to realize just what he was talking about. Apparently, he had overheard me telling the maintenance guy that I didn't recognize one of the comedians performing at the club that week. But the thing is, there was no one even remotely near us when we had that conversation. This guy wasn't standing close enough to hear what we were saying. So immediately we're both looking at each other like, wait, how long had this guy been standing here for? Had he been watching us? Things only got a little bit more weird. He followed that up with, "I bet she knows me. I'm really big." It was one of those moments where the air just felt heavier in our area. Me and maintenance guy both gave each other the side eye like, what's really going on here? We figured out that the guy was actually a guest at the hotel. Not just a guest, actually, but someone attending a gala event that we were hosting that night. And he was clearly intoxicated. But the thing is, We later found out from the bartender that he'd only had 2 drinks that entire night. So unless he pre-gamed hard or was on something else, the way he was acting didn't match the amount of alcohol he consumed. Our guess? Something more prescription related, likely mixed with booze. Anyway, after his bizarre intro, he started asking about other places nearby that he could go to since our bar had just closed. Now, that's not an unusual question. People ask that all the time. But something about the way he asked made it clear he wasn't just looking for a drink. He was using this as an excuse to flirt, or likely to just be a creep. The maintenance guy mentioned a bar nearby that was open till 2 a.m., and I added that there was a karaoke spot close by too. I even gave him the address. That's when he asked me if I'd been there before. I said yeah, I had. I went with my boyfriend and my best friend not too long ago, and it was actually kind of fun. That's when he leaned in and asked, "Oh, do you and your boyfriend have any kids?" I told him no, and that I didn't want any. But without skipping a beat, he goes, "Well, do you want to be the stepmother to mine?" I laughed, mostly out of discomfort, and said, no, I wasn't interested. But he didn't take that hint. The maintenance guy stepped in and said firmly, "Bro, she's got a boyfriend. She told you she's not interested." But the guy just looked at him and said, "What, are you the boyfriend? Are you two together or something?" Maintenance guy was like, "No, we're just coworkers," doing his best to de-escalate. And that's when the guy responded, "Well, there are just so many beautiful people working at this hotel. I figured since you're beautiful and she's beautiful, maybe you were together." That line made me cringe so hard on the inside. It was gross. That overly slick, trying too hard to be charming thing, with a heavy side of instability. Finally, it was about time for me to clock out. I shut down the computer and walked over to our front desk supervisor, who was standing nearby chatting with the night auditor. I told him flat out, "Hey, that guest over there? He's creeping me out and acting weird. He's definitely drunk or high, maybe both." Supervisor just brushed it off with a laugh and said, "Man, you always get the weird ones, don't you?" Like, yeah, I do. And I'm telling you that so maybe you, I don't know, step in and do something? You are the supervisor. But no, nothing. So I went back to clock out and then came back up front to leave. That's when I saw the guy was still hanging around, talking to the maintenance guy. I heard him say something like, "I need to go home with someone tonight." Maintenance didn't even flinch. He just said, "Well, buddy, it's not going to be me. Let's get you to your room or find you a cab." At that point, I decided I wasn't walking out to the parking lot alone. The hotel is in a pretty safe area, and usually I'll sit outside and wait for my boyfriend to pick me up. But not that night. I had a bad gut feeling, the kind that you don't ignore. I waited in the back office until my boyfriend texted me to let me know that he was out front. He pulled up near the luggage drop-off area, just off to the side of the main entrance, and I walked out to meet him. As I opened the truck door, I saw his face change. He was looking past me with this expression like, "Who the f*** is that?" I turned around and there he was. Creepy guy, standing no more than a foot behind me, once again just staring. Not at me, but at my boyfriend this time, like he was trying to size him up or something. I jumped into the truck and slammed the door shut. We pulled away and I looked back. He was still standing there watching us, still with that million-mile stare on his face. That's when he pulled out his phone. On the drive home, I told my boyfriend the entire story. Everything that had happened. He was pissed, especially when I mentioned that I'd told the supervisor, and he didn't do anything about it. My boyfriend told me to call the staff services line that corporate provides us with, so I did. I explained everything that had happened once again, from the creepy questions to the man following me outside, to my supervisor practically refusing to intervene. Thankfully, the person that I spoke to took it seriously. Without me having to do anything else, that guy was kicked out the next day. Finally, someone got put onto our hotel's do not rent list. I honestly didn't think I'd ever see that day. Turns out, that guy had also been harassing the bartender that night too. She was uncomfortable with him from the moment he ordered his first drink, but for some reason, once again, no one stepped in earlier. All I know is that man had a terrible vibe about him. Something wasn't right, and he spoke to it pretty much every time he said something. If I hadn't trusted my gut and waited inside for my ride, I'm not sure if staring would have been all that guy did. On my 19th birthday back in September of 2014, I moved into my first home, a small one-bed flat. I was beyond excited to have the freedom and independence that living alone would offer me, and quickly set about buying new furniture, decorations, and other new items for my home. One afternoon on the bus ride home, after a trip into my town to buy more household items, an elderly gentleman, someone in his late 60s if I had to guess, started speaking to me. Now, I've always been a social person that'll gladly speak to whoever speaks to me, so I engaged him in the conversation. Just polite chit-chat about what we'd been up to that day, what our plans were for the rest of it. Upon reaching the stop I'd be getting off at, he told me he was also getting off here, as he was visiting a friend who lived in a neighboring block of flats. He offered to help me carry my shopping, and I agreed. I walked with him to the front of my block and said my goodbyes. He left towards a different block, and I thought that was that. He didn't enter my building or see which flat belonged to me. At least, so I thought. Well, a few days later, I heard a knock on my door. I opened it to find the same elderly gentleman standing outside. I was quite taken aback considering he shouldn't know which flat I actually lived in. He'd also managed to get into the building without ringing my doorbell. That's when the realization hit me that he likely hid out of sight to watch which flat I had entered a few days back. He quickly forced his way into my home and tried to talk to me, like we were old friends. I lied and said I was about to leave as my friends were expecting me, hoping this would encourage him to get out. But within an instant of me finishing my sentence, he started groping me under my clothes, seemingly trying to get his hands into my underwear. I moved his hands away, but he was right back to trying to take my clothes off. I ran to my front door and told him, "If you don't leave now, I'm calling the cops. You need to go." Luckily, this worked, and he did, but he loitered outside. I waited to make sure he'd walked away before walking in an opposite direction, and immediately calling my dad in tears. We rang the police, who were as unhelpful as they could possibly be. 2 female officers who asked me, "Why did you let him into the flat?" despite me saying that he'd forced his way in. They encouraged me to not press charges as the name and address he'd given me in our first exchange were false, telling me it would be difficult to prove, a lot of paperwork, and you'd have to relive it in court if we did manage to find him. To this, I regretfully agreed. I was shocked and scared, and the police were wholly unsupportive. It doesn't end here, though. This man continued to stalk me for months, regularly appearing at my front door, following me when I was out. It wasn't until he was on the same bus as me to town, when I went to meet friends, that it finally stopped, as this was the first time I was able to point him out to someone. My friends went over and publicly called him out for stalking and harassing me. They threatened him, saying, "If we ever hear of you doing this again, you won't be able to use those arms to abuse another person. Leave our friend the fuck alone." That's when he quickly scampered away, and that's the last I ever saw of this guy. But this whole incident, and the weeks that it unfolded over, absolutely shook me. It all happened simply because I was polite to a seemingly innocent old man who wanted to help me and make conversation. Needless to say, I've never accepted another offer of helping me carry my shopping. Be careful who you let help you. It might not be good intentions they have in mind. Like most stories here, I've got to start mine with a little backstory. I was kicked out of my parents' home when I was 18. I belonged to a religious group called Jehovah's Witnesses. They were a very tight-knit community that took care of each other. My best friend Rick, who was in his mid-20s, had an extra room in his house, and he reached out to me to come live with him. I was happy with the offer, but Rick was married. He had been married for 3 years to his wife, Melissa. I didn't want to impose on their marriage. However, Rick promised Melissa was on board, and Melissa even told me to move in. So I did. This was in October of 2010. At first, everything was cool. I was on the same work schedule as Rick, so whenever he would go to work, I was gone too. I did my best not to impose, so I would sometimes stay out late with friends to give Rick and Melissa space. One day, probably a week after I had moved in, Rick called my phone and said, "Hey, where are you? You need to come home now, please." I was weirded out, so I rushed to Rick's house. This had never happened. I opened the door, I had my own key, and Melissa was inside the master bedroom making a lot of noise. It sounded like she was throwing clothes around, and she kept saying, "I'm not going," over and over again. I was confused because Melissa had always been such a sweetheart. I asked Rick what was going on. He explained to me that Melissa was mentally ill, and she would get like this every now and again. This absolutely floored me. I was completely unaware of Melissa's mental illness. It had never been apparent. He asked me to just record everything she was doing on a little video camera. I asked why, and he said, because she needs to see how she acts when she has her episodes. She doesn't believe she does. She doesn't remember any of it. I reluctantly agreed. Rick opened the door and Melissa just sat on the bed and stared at Rick. When she noticed I was there, she pointed and said, You did this. It was you," in a very manly and psychotic voice. She was nearly foaming at the mouth. I did my best not to respond. That was partly on purpose. The other portion was because of shock. Rick was able to convince Melissa to come out of the bedroom and to sit in the living room. Keep in mind, I'm still recording. Melissa began to talk in a British accent. Keep in mind, she was Mexican and called herself some weird name that I can't remember. Melissa explained that she was trying to save her alter ego from the bad woman. This was all very confusing. All of a sudden, she changed accents and started trying to get up and thrash the house, calling me and Rick pig fuckers. Melissa's face was so horrifying, and the screams that she let out were just as creepy. Then she would sit down and laugh, all the while pointing at me and screaming at the top of her lungs, "It's you." The cops showed up and took Melissa to a psych hospital on a psychiatric hold. I later found out it was Rick who called the cops moments before I got there. After Melissa was transported, Rick was getting ready to go meet her. As he gathered his belongings, he told me that the reason he wanted me to live at his home was for his own safety. I asked how long this had been going on, and he said that it had started soon after they got married, but that now it was only getting worse. Melissa came home a few days later, and I didn't see her. Every time I was home, she would lock herself in the bedroom. I was a little weirded out by it, but also relieved that I didn't have to deal with the aftermath of the incident. About a week later, I was on one of the home phones with the girl I was courting at the time. During the conversation, I could hear breathing on the other line. My friend asked me if it was me breathing hard, and I said no. All of a sudden, I hear the doorknob to my room turning. It was locked, but this was followed by banging on the door. That's when a violent voice starts screaming, "Let me in. You're in my house. It's you." My friend could hear it on her side of the phone line too, and freaked out. I pretty much instantly hung up. I wanted to prevent people from knowing just how ill Melissa was. Because the banging wasn't stopping, and I for sure wasn't going out that door. I jumped out the window, single-story house, before running to my car. I see Melissa running out the front door and running towards my car as I drove off. The problem was that house was on a court, and my car was facing towards the dead-end portion of it. So I had to drive and turn around to get onto the main street, and I had to pass Melissa while doing it. Melissa was standing in the middle of the street. I was able to get just past her by nearly swiping the curb. But as I did, Melissa wound up and violently punched my passenger side rear window. It didn't break, but I had my doubts for a few seconds. I decided that day that I was living in my car until I could afford to rent my own place. I didn't have many belongings, so I figured it'd be best. Rick safeguarded what I did have at his house by having his parents move them to their garage for me to pick up later. It wasn't until weeks later that I found out that my clothes had pieces of paper with weird messages quoting the Bible, long letters informing me I was at fault for all the negativity, letters about how I had demons inside my body, and all sorts of other crazy long letters. They were in my suits, flannels, jeans, shoes, practically every article of clothing I owned. To this day, this is likely one of the most unsettling experiences that I've ever shared with another human being before. I'm willing to concede that Melissa's behavior was due to her unchecked mental stuff going on, and it wasn't really her behind those screams, notes, and everything else. But understanding that it was an illness doesn't take away from just how shaking those encounters were. I still consider Rick a friend, but we haven't spoken since 2011. I'm not sure if he's still with Melissa, or if the wheels fell off their marriage to the point where Rick had enough. I've often thought about phoning Rick just to see how he's doing, but the thing that scares me off from doing that is if I do, will I hear, "It's you," greet me on that phone? Christmas Eve dinner at Burger King. Sounds pretty uneventful, right? Definitely not my first choice, but I had to work late, and with it being Christmas Eve, pretty much everything else was closed. I got off work at around 9 p.m. and remembered I had a couple Burger King coupons in my wallet, so that sealed the deal. When I got there, the place was technically still open, but the dining room had already shut down for the night. The only way to order was through the drive-thru. Problem is, I don't drive. I tried to walk up to the window, hoping maybe they'd make an exception since it was late and I was clearly on foot. But the woman working the drive-thru wouldn't go for it. She said I needed to be in a vehicle and that there were no exceptions. I'll admit, I got a little frustrated with her. I said a few things I'm not proud of. But hey, I was tired, hungry, and irritated. Not a great combo. That's when an older woman pulled up behind me in her car and leaned out the window. She offered to let me hop in with her so I could order my food. Honestly, it was a really kind gesture. At first, I told her no, I didn't want to be a bother. But she was persistent in a polite kind of way. And eventually, I accepted the offer. We ordered together, and everything seemed normal enough, just a little slow. We waited so long for the food that I ended up missing my last bus home. I was visibly upset, and without missing a beat, she offered to give me a ride home. Now, I'm a 30-something-year-old man, probably around 225 pounds at the time. I don't usually feel threatened, especially not by a woman who looked to be in her mid-50s. If the situation were any different, I probably wouldn't have accepted. But it was late, I was cold, and I didn't feel like waiting around hours for the next bus. So I said yes. I gave her my address, and we were on our way. But about 5 minutes into the drive, she took a wrong turn. I politely let her know she was heading the wrong way and told her how to get back on track. That's when everything in this woman seemed to flip up on me. She looked over at me smiling, but it wasn't that same warm smile that she had earlier. It was tight. Something about her eyes had changed. She told me, "I just can't let you spend Christmas Eve alone. You're coming back to my house." I tried to laugh it off, told her I needed to get home, that I had a dog that needed to be let out. But she kept insisting, said her place would be more fun. Then, out of nowhere, she offered up that she had Coke and liquor at the house. Just like that. She said she had plenty of each, waiting for us. Now, here's where things got real for me. I'm in recovery. I've had issues with substance abuse in the past, and if this had been a couple of years earlier, that offer might have been enough to cloud my judgment. But I'm not that person anymore. I told her no, even repeated it, said I wasn't interested and that I just wanted to go home. She ignored that completely. She didn't turn around. In fact, she only started driving more erratically, blowing past stop signs, making weird turns, like she was deliberately trying to get somewhere fast, and not necessarily somewhere that I wanted to be. Now, I won't lie, my heart was pounding in my chest. My mind was racing. I kept telling myself, you're bigger than her. You could overpower her if you had to. But it wasn't just her I was worried about. What if there was someone waiting at her house? What if this was all part of some larger plan? And then there was the guilt. I mean, this woman had helped me when she didn't have to. She let me into her car, got me food. It felt wrong to suddenly see her as dangerous, but every alarm bell in my body was going off. That's when I saw my chance. We were coming up to an intersection where traffic had naturally backed up. A car was stopped at a stop sign and another one was crossing, forcing her to at least slow down, nearly to a full stop. I didn't wait. I opened the door, jumped out of the still-moving car, left my food behind, and ran. I didn't look back until I was a good distance away, and when I finally turned, she was out of her car calling after me, trying to talk me into getting back in with her, like there was nothing wrong, like she hadn't just completely ignored my request to go home. But there was no way I was getting back in the car with her. I kept running until I was absolutely sure that I wasn't being followed, all the way home. Once I finally got there, I locked the door behind me and just stood there for a minute, trying to catch my breath and wrap my head around what just happened. I couldn't stop thinking about how close it had been, and what might have happened if I hadn't trusted my gut. The part that gets me the most is that I almost didn't get out. I almost felt too bad to leave. I kept telling myself, she's just being kind. Maybe she's a little lonely on Christmas Eve. But if that were true, why wouldn't she take me home when I asked? Why push alcohol and drugs on someone she just met? Why lie about the route? Like I said earlier, I'm a pretty big guy, but that doesn't mean that I could easily shake this off. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized this is the fear women deal with every single day. That sense of, something's wrong, but I don't want to be rude. That guilt, even when you know someone's crossing a line. I still don't know what her intentions really were. Could have been something minor. Could have been something much worse. Abduction, taking my organs, something in between. All I know is that I wasn't about to find out. I didn't go to the police, though I've thought about this a lot since. Part of me felt like I wouldn't be taken seriously. After all, I'm a grown man. Who's going to believe that I was scared of this elderly woman in a compact car? But now I wonder, what if she's done this before? What if she tries it again with someone else? Someone a little bit more vulnerable? I keep asking myself, should I have reported it? And honestly, maybe I still should. Because no matter how nice someone seems, if your gut tells you something's wrong, it probably is. Almost a year ago, I, a 24-year-old male, was fresh out of college and had just moved into an apartment with my middle school bestie, 23 female, and her fiancé, 25-year-old male. This was after a long period of not seeing her in person. My bestie and I had a long and great relationship with only a few rocky periods. I didn't know her fiancé well. I had met him a few times. He came off as kind of rude and loud, but mostly nice enough. I let a lot of little annoying behaviors slide because she was so in love with him. I really just wanted to spend time with my best friend and have a safe roof over my head. Over the course of a few months, I slowly discovered that she was trapped in an abusive relationship with the most classic example of a malignant narcissist imaginable. Their fights, really just him raging at her while she cried, escalated to the point where he was completely trashing the apartment, breaking her phone and laptop, hiding her car keys, blocking the door, and grabbing her arm so hard that it left bruises, all while hurling out the worst insults he could fathom at the top of his lungs for hours. This man is about a foot taller and 100 pounds heavier than me, so there was nothing I could do other than give her a ride somewhere else away from him until the next day. He didn't like it when I did that. Once it reached the point of physical harm against her, though, I put my foot down and demanded that he move out or I'd call the cops. He wasn't even technically signed onto the lease, so I could have kicked him out. He begged for time to find a new place. He was extremely drunk and high the night that he hurt her, and he promised to stay sober until he moved out. Not wanting to escalate things any further, I agreed on the condition that nothing like that ever happen again. My friend and her fiancé broke up soon after that. 3 weeks pass, and everything's going great. Ex-fiancé has found a new place, although he's still living in ours. He's training for a new job, and while still loud and inconsiderate, he hasn't caused any problems. So one night, I get ready for bed early. I have an important meeting early the next day. I put on some comfy pajamas, locking my door before I change out of habit. My bestie is out working that night, and it's just me upstairs in bed and ex-fiancé downstairs yelling on the phone about something that I can't make out. I tune him out and try to sleep. I figure he's moving out next week and this'll all just be behind us. But then my chest rattles from the booming footfalls up the stairs to my room. This woke me up. My eyes snap open to see my bedroom doorknob rattling back and forth. Luckily, it's still locked. He lets out a yell of pure malice and then bangs on my door. He screams my name, and it's so slurred that he sounds like he's trying to impersonate a lizard man. The hinges on the door aren't looking so good. We live in a crappy, cheap apartment with thin doors, so I know I have to do something before he breaks the door in. I say the only thing I can think of. "What the man?" Suddenly, the banging and screaming stops. The doorknob falls still, and after a terrifying moment of silence, he says flatly, "Open the door, bud. Just come and open the door." I still laugh about that one. Like, after all that, I just walk over and open up? Nah. Instead, I grabbed my essentials and jumped out my bedroom window. I was on the second floor, but we lived up on a hill, so the fall wasn't quite that high, although I still managed to fall wrong. I hobbled as quickly as I could to my car and peeled off. I called my best friend and warned her not to go home that night. We made plans for her to stay with a friend after she got off work. I made it to another friend's house and passed out there for a few hours. I woke up to a call from my bestie. Apparently her ex had traveled all the way to her workplace with a knife and broke in. He assaulted her and held the knife up to her special needs client's throat and said he'd kill him in front of her. Thank God a coworker overheard everything in another room and was able to call the police in time for everyone to come out alive. My bestie also acknowledged that he was on the phone with her while he was banging on my door, and he said that he was going to kill me and make her listen to it. I was totally alone in that apartment with him, sleeping upstairs in my bed. If I hadn't locked my door that night, would I even still be alive? If I had left my car keys downstairs, would I have been able to get away? When I got back to the apartment the next morning, my bedroom door was completely bashed in. My belongings were scattered everywhere, and the large butcher knives that were typically in the kitchen were now sitting in the corner of the hallway to my room. Ex-fiancé got arrested on some pretty serious charges. He wasn't granted bail, and thankfully, I haven't had to have any further interaction with this guy. What I'm about to share happened less than an hour ago, and it's hard typing out because I'm still shaking over it. I wanted to talk about this somewhere, and the only place I could think of was surprisingly Reddit. For context, my wife and I are on vacation in Mexico. We both honestly are loving it here, and this situation doesn't change that, although I'm now reevaluating security. My wife and I went out to dinner tonight and walked back to our hotel. We get inside our room and are setting things down. A few minutes go by and there's a soft knock at the door. A man quietly says something in Spanish with an inflection that's trying to get our attention. Think room service or something to that effect. My wife looks at me like wondering who could be at the door because we obviously didn't order anything. At this point, I should clarify that we had the do not disturb tag on the door. A few seconds go by, and there's another knock. My wife signals for me to go get the door, and I start making my way over. At this point, we've made no sounds for maybe a minute before and during the knocks. Just as I reach the door, there's a sound of a keycard unlocking the door before it swings partially open. On the other side of the door, there's a dirty-looking man, and he's now about 2 feet from my face. I put my hand on the door to prevent it from opening up any further. I think he was as surprised as I was. He started speaking Spanish, and I hear the word Wi-Fi somewhere in there. I say, "No hablo español," and in broken English, he tries to ask if the Wi-Fi's down. My wife says it's not. I'm just kind of shell-shocked by what just happened, and I keep my hand on the door as he talks and eventually leaves. I shut the door and engage the physical lock this time, something that I normally do out of habit, but because we had just gotten back and I wanted to set some stuff down, I hadn't gotten to it before. I talk with my wife as we try to gather our thoughts about what just happened. Essentially, a man knocked, got no reply, then let himself in to ask about Wi-Fi? No, this was a clear burglary attempt, and that man had a master key and thought that we weren't home. A minute or two after this, we've collected ourselves and head down to the front desk, trying to make sense of what had just occurred. I pass this information to the front desk in case this guy attempts to do it to other doors. They seem to take it seriously, although I've gotten no updates beyond that. The fact that this just happened has my mind kind of blown, and I don't know if I've fully processed it yet. Like, what if we were back 30 minutes later? Probably would have lost some stuff. 5 minutes later, we walk in on a guy in our hotel room. What if we had gone to bed earlier this evening? Could have been asleep. The AC in here is loud, and I don't know if I would have heard the door knocking through my sleep. If this was going to go down, surely the way that it did was as optimal as could be. But those ifs, those are crazy. I'll definitely be storing our valuables in the safe now. Consider this a lesson learned. But beyond that, my thinking isn't all about our possessions. It's about our physical safety. I shudder to think what could have happened if we were in a more compromising position. Think, knocked out for the night, now with a stranger in our room watching over us. When I, a 21-year-old female, was 17, I wanted to be an au pair. I was young, eager to travel, and figured it'd be the perfect way to see a bit of the world before deciding what to do next with my life. Because of my age, most countries weren't an option, the exception being England, so I started looking for host families there. Eventually, I found a listing that seemed ideal, a single mother with 2 kids, a boy and a girl. I messaged her and she responded rather quickly. She was friendly, warm, and seemed genuinely excited to have me. We chatted several times and I got the sense that she was organized and responsible. We agreed on a start date, and that's when I booked my flight. When I landed at the airport, that's the first time that things started to feel off. This woman wasn't there. No text, no missed call, no nothing. So I messaged her, and she replied a few minutes later saying she was stuck in traffic, but still on her way. Okay, I figured that was fair enough. Airports are busy, and I wasn't immediately worried. She told me to go stand at the exit, and that she'd be arriving in a blue car. A few minutes later, she messaged again with, "I'm here." But I didn't see any blue car. I looked around and scanned the entire area. I finally spotted a vehicle that might have fit the description, and just as I was walking towards it, a woman got out. Only it wasn't the woman that I'd been speaking to. Not even close. I froze, but she approached me quickly, smiling and speaking like she knew me. At that exact moment, my phone buzzed. It was a long text from the original woman, the one I had spent weeks communicating with. In it, she said that her husband had come home unexpectedly from his overseas job, and they had gotten into a huge fight. He didn't want an au pair living in the house, so instead of canceling or telling me before I got on the plane, she just gave me to her friend. Her good friend, she said, also had 2 kids and could really use my help. I was stunned. Like, standing there holding my suitcase, not even breathing, stunned. Something about the timing of the text felt eerie, almost like someone had been watching me and waited until that very moment that I made eye contact with the stranger to send it, like it was rehearsed. The woman who met me seemed cheerful, almost overly so. She started grabbing my luggage, putting it into her car, all the while talking a mile a minute. I didn't even know what to say. I'm a naturally nervous person and I hate confrontation, especially with strangers. I felt cornered. I didn't want to be rude or cause a scene, so I just let it happen. Once everything was in her car, she said that we needed to leave because she was parked in a restricted zone and didn't want to get a ticket. I hesitated and told her I wasn't comfortable with this. She said she understood, but she really needed help at home and it would all be fine. Just 2 kids, she promised. Nothing to worry about. Still unsure of how to stop what was happening, I got into the car. And I know how that sounds. Looking back, I still get the willies thinking about it. But in the moment, I didn't know what else to do. Everything felt wrong, but I couldn't quite put my finger on why. The second we pulled away, I told her again that I wasn't comfortable. I said I wanted to go back to the airport. She looked irritated, but told me she couldn't let me out there because it wasn't allowed, and she might get fined. I honestly have no idea if that's true or not, so we drove a bit further, still on airport grounds, until she finally pulled over in a quieter area. I got out and phoned my parents, shaking and crying, by the way. While I was on the phone with them, I noticed she stayed in her car and was talking to someone, another woman, I think. I couldn't hear much, and what I did hear wasn't in English, so I had no idea what they were saying. But something about it made my skin crawl. Once again, it felt coordinated, like I was the topic of discussion, like cargo instead of a person. After I finished talking to my parents, I got halfway back in the car and firmly told her that I wanted to go back to the airport terminal. No detours, no heading to town, no nothing. But she kept pushing. Are you sure? I can take you to my house and you can see how you feel. Maybe just for a bit. I said no repeatedly. Finally, she took me back to the terminal. I got out, went back inside, and stayed on the phone with my parents the entire time. But things only got weirder. Later, I received a bunch of voice memos from that woman and 2 other people that I didn't know. I couldn't understand the language, but the tone was uneasy to say the least. One of the voices sounded angry, the others just bizarre. My parents tried to call the woman that I had originally spoken to, but she blocked them both immediately. After everything settled down, I did a little more digging into the situation. That's when I found out the contract that I had been sent wasn't even legitimate. It looked real, but it wasn't legally binding at all. It wasn't even the official government template for au pair agreements. The address that woman gave me, also fake. She didn't live there, and I'm honestly not sure if she even had kids or a husband. Later, I learned that the city that I had flown into had a bad reputation, known as a hotspot for human trafficking. I had no idea of this at the time, but knowing that now, after everything that happened, it puts my stomach into knots. I don't know for certain what would have happened if I'd gotten in that car one last time and let her drive me into town. Maybe nothing. Maybe I would have been fine. But I've played that scenario over in my head 100 times. And every single version ends with me realizing how lucky I was to trust my gut and say no. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just being paranoid, if maybe it was just a misunderstanding or a weird attempt to help a friend find childcare. But no matter how I look at it, it doesn't sit right. The secrecy, the lies, the fake contract, plus the blocked numbers, the push to isolate me from the airport, that insistence on driving me somewhere else. Whatever was going on, I'm just glad that I got out of there. I'm 4 years older now, and I've come to grips with the fact that sometimes the creepiest part of your story isn't what happens. It's what almost happened. I was about 9 years old when my story takes place, so this was likely back in 1996. I was playing in my family's huge front yard. We lived in a quiet neighborhood just outside of city limits. A man drove up and pulled his car over to the side of the road. He got out from behind the wheel and greeted me. He then told me he was lost and asked me how to get to a specific city, which was over an hour away. I knew the name of the city, but obviously not how to get there. I pointed the direction of the highway and said I thought that might be the right way. I vaguely remember telling him that I didn't know and that he should ask an adult. To this, though, the man started making comments such as, "Oh, I'm sure you can help me. You look like a really smart little girl." Then the man pulls out a map and sets it on the hood of his car. He asked me if I can come show him on his map where this specific city was. As a child, it didn't even dawn on me that the stranger had a map. Thus, he'd be able to find the city himself. I just kept saying that I didn't know how to get to the city that he was asking about. He kept telling me I looked smart and emphasizing that he was lost and needed help. And because one of my nearby neighbors was mowing their lawn, it was hard to hear, so the man would say he couldn't hear me, and he'd ask me to come closer. I didn't move closer, though. He did. My parents had planted hedges around our yard, but at the time the shrubs were still pretty short. At this point, the man had moved from the front of his car and started crossing the hedge line, asking me to come closer so he could hear what I was saying. Now, here's the part that I wasn't aware of, and my mom filled me in on when I was much older. She and my dad were inside our house. We have a bunch of windows facing the front yard, but also a bunch of trees between the house and yard, so my parents couldn't necessarily see me. My mom said our dog Annie, a 3-year-old German Shepherd Golden Retriever boxer mix, was going apeshit. Annie was barking nonstop while running from the door and windows over to my parents over and over again. My parents were in the middle of doing something and just thought Annie probably had to pee. My mom went to let Annie outside, and my mom said the moment she opened the door, Annie flew off the porch. My mom swears to this day that Annie was hauling ass so fast that her paws didn't even touch the porch. Now, back to the scene between me and the stranger. He was at the hedge line, maybe 12 feet away from me. I'm just standing there, and suddenly, Annie comes shooting across the yard and stops right in front of me. Annie was the sweetest dog, and we had her since she was a puppy. The runt of her litter, but still a good-sized gal considering her mix of breeds. So here Annie was, full-on mohawk from head to tail, standing straight up. She was baring her teeth, snarling, and snapping towards the strange man. I remember looking at her and trying to get her to calm down. But still, this didn't stop her. And even worse, it didn't stop the strange man. He slowly took a step forward into the yard. Annie seemed to be fully aware that this man didn't have good intentions because she never backed down. In fact, she kept me behind her and kept backing up, pushing me back towards the house. There was no way she was going to let that man get past her. But still, that guy cautiously made a couple more steps. Around this time, my parents looked out the window to see where Annie went. Of course, they go on to see the whole scene out in the yard and promptly freak out. They ran out the door screaming. I just remember being confused with everything going on. The strange man, the neighbor's loud mower, Annie looking crazy, and my parents running and screaming. When the stranger saw my parents coming, he ran back to his car and gunned it down the street. I vaguely remember seeing the stranger's map flying in the air as my dad threw me over his shoulder and ran back towards the house. So yeah, looking back, it seems like some dude was totally trying to abduct me, and my dog may have saved my life. Like, it's crazy to think about what my life would look like, or would it even be a life, if that man had gotten me over to that map. We had Annie until she passed when I was 17. She was an incredibly good girl, probably the best in the whole world. Last year, I started law school out in Los Angeles. I'd never lived in a big city before, so moving to a place with over 4 million people felt like a major life shift. I was excited, nervous, sure, but mostly thrilled to be stepping into this whole new world. Growing up, I always knew I had a half-sister who lived out in LA. It was never exactly a secret, but it was one of those topics in my family that had this weird tension around it. Anytime I brought her up, my parents would shut that conversation down, and their tone made it clear that it wasn't something they wanted me asking questions about. Still, over the years, I had looked her up online out of curiosity. I knew what she looked like, but that was about it. She was never super active on social media, so there wasn't much to go off of, and we'd never actually spoken. Then, out of the blue during my first year of law school, I got a Facebook friend request from her. Her profile seemed real. Her name matched, the profile picture looked like her, and we even had a few mutual friends. Right after I accepted the request, she messaged me. She said she'd love for us to finally meet and invited me to a small dinner party she was having in the park with a few friends. At first, I was thrilled. This was something I'd always wanted, to meet her, to maybe build a connection, to finally fill in that weird blank spot in my family history. But the more I thought about it, the more anxious I got. I mean, yeah, there was a version of this that could be amazing. Maybe we'd totally hit it off, become close and laugh about how weird it was that we hadn't done this sooner. But there was also a version where it got super emotional or awkward. What if she didn't like me? What if I didn't like her? What if we said the wrong thing in front of her friends and ended up crying or fighting in the middle of a public park? The idea of meeting for the first time in front of other people just didn't quite sit right with me. It felt like this was something that should be private. Honestly, if she had said, "Let's grab a coffee," or "Do you want to meet for lunch?" I would have been there in a heartbeat. But a nighttime dinner in a public park with strangers? I don't know about that. And I couldn't shake the anxiety that something about it felt weird. So I didn't go. At the time, I chalked it up to nerves. I told myself I wasn't emotionally ready and that I'd try again when I felt more grounded. A few weeks later, I decided to look up the park that she had invited me to, just once again out of curiosity. Maybe we could still meet there someday, only just the two of us. And that's when red flags started flying. I won't name the park, but if you're from LA, you'd probably know it, and you'd know to stay far away, especially at night. Turns out, it's in an area with extremely high violent crime rates. The neighborhood is controlled by gangs. According to multiple things I found, even people conducting illegal business in that park have to pay a tax to the local gangs just to be left alone. That discovery flipped everything upside down for me. I was already uneasy, but now I was genuinely scared, and I needed to find out what was going on. I knew what school my sister attended. It was a local university, and by chance, I had a friend who went there too. I asked her if she'd be willing to help me out and try to find my sister on campus. She said she would, and sure enough, she managed to get in touch with her. After confirming that she was open to meeting, we arranged for the three of us to hang out at a friend's place. That night ended up being amazing. The three of us had such a good time. There weren't any dramatic breakdowns or awkward silences. Just dinner, a movie, and a whole lot of laughter. There were a few tears, but in a good way. We were both nervous at first, but it felt natural almost immediately. We clicked. At one point, I brought up the Facebook message and the dinner invite. That's when she broke something to me. She hadn't used Facebook in years, not since high school. She wasn't the one that sent me a request. She didn't send the message. That account wasn't even her. By the time I checked again, that profile was gone, so there was nothing to report. But my sister told me that this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Someone had impersonated her before and even scammed one of her friends in some fake concert ticket scheme. She wasn't surprised about this, but rather annoyed. I was more than annoyed, though. I was freaked out. Someone out there knew who I was, knew that I had just moved to LA, and pretended to be my sister to get me to show up alone at night in one of the most dangerous places in the city. I have no idea who it was or why, and honestly, I don't think I want to know the why. Meeting my sister after all these years was something that I'll never forget. It meant the world to me. And I'm so grateful that it happened the way that it did, with a buffer in a safe place and with someone I trusted. But the fact that it all started with what might have been a setup gives me goosebumps even now. Whatever their intentions were, I know one thing for sure. I lucked out and dodged something bad. Maybe it was just some bizarre scam, but maybe it was something far worse. I'm lucky I trusted my gut, because if I hadn't, I don't know where that night would have ended. I'm going to start this off by saying my story might be a little long, so I appreciate you in advance for sticking with me. I'm a 23-year-old woman living alone in a pretty nice apartment in a decent neighborhood. I've been here for about 2 years now. Normally, our mail gets dropped off at the mailboxes in the front of our building, but every so often, packages get delivered straight to our apartment doors. It's a small perk, and honestly, I've always appreciated the convenience and knowing that our packages aren't going to get swiped right from the lobby. Well, about a year ago, I happened to be home in the afternoon because I had taken a half day off work due to a doctor's appointment. While I was relaxing in the living room, my front doorbell rang. I have a Ring camera, so I checked the feed and saw that it was the mailman. Pretty routine stuff, so I didn't hesitate to answer the door. But this interaction was my first inkling that something strange was going to happen. The man on the other side of the door appeared to be in his mid-30s, white, a little short, probably around 5'5", with oversized glasses and messy, thinning hair. Not exactly someone that would stand out in a crowd, but someone you'd recognize again if you saw them. I opened the door, smiled politely, and said, "Thanks so much," as I reached for the package. But instead of handing it off and just walking away, he stared at me. This wasn't for just a moment. I think it was around 10 seconds, and it looked as if he was staring through me, like something was off. This confused me, so I said, "Oh, did you need to take a picture of the delivery or something?" He didn't answer the question. Instead, he said very directly, "I know you. I've seen you before." It's times like this that I'm glad that I have the Ring that I do, because you can actually see my entire reaction on the doorbell footage. My expression changed instantly. I shift my weight backwards, kind of moving behind the door. I said, "I'm sorry, I don't think we've met." I was trying to stay polite, but also shut that conversation down as quickly as I could. You can even see me starting to shut the door. That's when he raised his voice just a little and took a step towards me. "I've seen your name on your mail. I found you on Instagram." My heart dropped and I froze. "Me?" was all I managed to get out. I felt like a deer in headlights. And that's when he went on saying, "Yeah, you're a person of interest on Instagram for me. Your account was private, but you're really pretty." I give a flat, "Thanks," before physically taking that package out of his hand and slamming the door, locking it immediately. I stood there behind the door for just a moment, trying to process what had just happened. And I was grateful that I had the whole thing recorded. I showed the footage to my then boyfriend. He agreed. It was seriously weird. Now, weird, I can deal with, but it's what came next that made it even more unsettling. A few days later, I think it was a Saturday, the mailman came back. He walked up and rang my doorbell about 10 times. Not rapid fire, but spaced out, like he was deliberately waiting in between presses. But you'd think that a mailman who has hundreds of letters to drop off to various people isn't just waiting around at a door that's not opening, standing there, staring at the apartment number. But I didn't answer the door. I spoke through the Ring camera. "Hi, can you just leave any mail you have? Thanks." But his response was, "I actually don't have any mail for you today. I just wanted to come by and say hi. Can I come in for a glass of water?" I didn't say a thing. I admittedly froze again, mainly because I didn't know how to respond to that. I just waited until he left, then replayed the whole thing once again in my head about 100 times over. 2 weeks went by, and I started to feel like maybe that was the end of it. Maybe I had overreacted about the whole thing. Maybe I was seeking out drama that wasn't really there. But one morning, after I'd already left for work, I got a call from my boyfriend. He'd spent the night, and he told me to check the Ring camera because something had just happened. I pulled up the feed on my phone, and sure enough, that mailman was back. He rang the doorbell, and my boyfriend answered the door. There was an extended pause, and you could clearly see that the mailman didn't have anything in his hands. He was just standing there, obviously taken more than just a little aback by the fact that my boyfriend had answered. My boyfriend asked, "Can I help you?" The mailman replied with, "Yeah, where's that small girl who lives here?" That part really got to me. I stand at just under 5 feet tall, and I'm pretty petite, maybe 100 pounds soaking wet. The way he described me felt clinical, almost like it was something he had rehearsed. My boyfriend didn't hesitate. He said, "Oh, I live here too, and from now on, leave all of our packages downstairs. There's no reason for you to come to the door anymore." That's when he shut the door right in the mailman's face. I was so relieved by my boyfriend's presence of mind. At the time, he didn't live with me full time, maybe 2 nights a week at most. But him being there clearly made a difference. After that incident, the mailman pretty much disappeared. At least, I didn't see him again. My boyfriend and I eventually broke up, and with time, I stopped thinking about the mailman entirely. That is, up until today, which is what sparked me wanting to share this. I was coming home, entering the building just as he was leaving. We made eye contact, and I tried to walk past without engaging. But he turned and started walking alongside me. He said, "Hey, I haven't seen that guy in a while who used to live with you. Did he move out?" I panicked a little. I walked faster, fumbling for my keys, but I was able to get out a lie, and I said, "Oh, he's around." And as I opened my door, I added loudly, "Hey honey, I'm home," before quickly shutting the door behind me. I don't know why I said that. I think I just instinctively wanted to make it seem like I wasn't alone. And once again, something about the way he said it. That guy who used to live with you. It was like he was keeping tabs. So here I am, writing all this out, and I'm trying to figure out, am I overreacting? Am I being overly paranoid? Or is this really as creepy as it feels? Because to me, it feels like someone crossed a line, multiple times. But another part of me still wonders if I'm just being the drama. What do you think? Is this normal? Or is this something I should be seriously worried about? For the obligatory background information in my post, I had a childhood. It was terrible, where I don't remember anything from birth all the way to 13 years of age. Everything I know about what happened through those years was from a mixture of sparse memories, things my family members have told me about myself, and the police reports. One of the things I do happen to remember, though, is this lady that I called Auntie. No first name, no last name, no real clue about who she was. I just called her Auntie. I started seeing her when I was 7. I'd sit in her living room while she typed everything I said into her laptop. She was calm, soft-spoken, and seemed trustworthy. I saw her once a month, and she made me feel like I could open up. So I did. By the time I was 14, I confided in her that I had tried to unalive myself several times. There were a lot of reasons why. My mom's growing toxicity, the crushing isolation I felt, and more than anything, the trauma from my early childhood that, even though I didn't fully remember it, it never really left me. Now, even at that age, I started to question why I kept seeing Auntie, despite never feeling any better about my situation. I remember asking my mom about it on the way to one of these appointments. Maybe I could see someone else, someone who might actually help. She just snapped at me to be quiet. And that was the beginning of the breakdown between me and my mom. I used to cry to Auntie about how my mom made me feel, how unsafe and unheard I felt at home. But instead of supporting me, Auntie would always defend my mother. She'd downplay everything or suggest that I was overreacting. Back then, this led to me making excuses for her. I thought maybe she was just trying to help me see my mom in a more empathetic light. I thought maybe that was part of healing. But that turned out to not be the case at all. As over more time spent with Auntie, her reactions would only go further off the tracks. When I was 16, I wasn't exactly on my best behavior. I'd snuck out to parties, drank whatever was offered, and definitely kept it all a secret from my family. But during one of our sessions, Auntie asked me a weirdly specific question, something only someone with inside information would know. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe she'd just known me for so long that she could read between the lines. But even that illusion broke when at 17, she stopped asking and started stating things. She'd mentioned the parties directly. She wasn't trying to hide it anymore. By then, the relationship between me and my mother had almost completely fallen apart. And what really broke me, and what still hurts me to this day, is that at the end of every session, Auntie would call my mom into the room and tell her everything I had just said, nearly every word verbatim, and right in front of me. She'd quote me directly, and I'd sit there frozen as she relayed details about the emotional abuse I was facing at home, directly to the person who was responsible for it. My grades tanked. I wasn't allowed to go out anymore. I was even more isolated. And on that year's birthday, I tried one more time to take my own life. I went into my mom's room looking for something, anything, to help me do it. I was frantically rummaging through drawers when I found myself inside of her walk-in closet. I barely remembered she'd had one. I was desperate. And in the corner, under some hanging clothes, there was a suitcase. It didn't look old or dusty, which actually made me curious. I opened it, and inside were stacks and stacks of papers. It immediately stopped me in my tracks, and I just sat on the floor, overwhelmed and confused. And that's when I started reading. They were transcripts, pages and pages of my sessions with Auntie, typed, organized, dated, going all the way back to the beginning, when I first started seeing her at the age of 7. I felt physically sick. I had enough sense to quietly take a few of the older transcripts to avoid drawing attention. That night, after reading through them, my thoughts went to a very dark place. I knew I couldn't take much more of this, and I gave myself a silent deadline. I was going to figure out what the hell was going on before I turned 18, and from that moment on, I was hyper-aware in every session. I watched Auntie. I looked around her house. I asked my mom more questions about who this woman actually was. All I ever got in response was the same line. She's a psychologist. Now, eventually, I did something risky, something that I knew could completely blow up in my face. I stole my mom's phone. She was in the shower one morning. I had a bag packed just in case I needed to disappear for a while. As soon as I heard the water running, I took her phone and bolted. I didn't even look at it until I was on a bus heading to nowhere in particular. I started digging through her texts. I found Auntie pretty quickly. Though her name was unfamiliar, the conversations made it clear who she was. Appointment bookings, casual chatting. I scrolled through everything. I got off the bus and just kept walking, reading through years and years of messages. There wasn't exactly anything incriminating in them. No smoking gun for sure. But that's when I checked the call logs and I saw that my mom and Auntie talked all the time. Of course they would. Anything serious was happening over the phone, not through text. Smart. I remember sitting on a curb, totally emotionally drained. I looked through my mom's social media accounts, tried to find Auntie's name, but that was a bust. And then, almost by accident, I found her in my mom's followers. Her username was weird. Nothing close to her real name, but the photos, those were unmistakable. There she was, smiling with some of my mom's friends, and buried deep in her feed, a photo of her and my mom together from years ago. They had been friends even before I was born. That's when things started to click for me. The transcripts, the constant betrayals, the way she always defended my mom. She wasn't a psychologist. She was a family friend simply playing a role. I went home that night. I got beaten for stealing the phone, but I barely felt it. I only had one question burning in my mind for my mother. Who is Auntie really? And she couldn't answer. This never entirely blew over, but by the time I was 18, I had made it to college, and I was no longer in my mom's house. I was lucky. I had an old friend who let me stay with him, and it was great that we ended up at the same school, if just for the little bit of support that I had in him. He's actually still one of my best friends today, and honestly, that saved me. What finally gave me some closure came while cleaning out my own Instagram. I was removing people I didn't recognize or care about, and that's when I saw her. A familiar, odd username buried in my followers list. I searched it, and it linked to a Facebook profile, and of course, as you could imagine, it was Auntie. She had been following me this entire time, quietly watching yet never interacting with me outside of our sessions. In her Facebook bio, the part that broke me a little bit more, it said, chemistry teacher with over 20 years of experience. Not a psychologist. Never was, never would be. I broke down that night. Years of all my unanswered questions suddenly started to make sense. The invasive questions, the manipulation, her own isolation. All of the invasive questions I fielded for years, the manipulation, the further isolation, engineered by the woman who was supposed to protect me, as well as a friend who went years and years back. Even now, I kind of mourn the time that I've lost. While other people in their early 20s are making friends, building futures, going out and having fun, I'm trying to use that time to heal, to try and rebuild from the wreckage of a childhood that was taken from me. 2 days ago, I had my first session with a real psychologist. I did my research this time. I sat down and awkwardly explained why I was there, embarrassed by how surreal it all sounded. But he just smiled and said, "It sounds like we've got a lot of work to do." Yeah, we definitely do. I wanted to share this in case someone out there has experienced something similar. Therapy gone wrong, or a lifetime of feeling like you were trapped in a lie. From what people have told me, it gets better, slowly, with the right people in your corner and a bit of luck. As for Auntie, I'm pretty sure you can see where this is going. Let's not meet ever again. So this happened a few years back, and it's something I've never really talked about. I actually don't know why I'm posting now, but lately, it's been crawling back into my thoughts more and more often. I guess it's just something I need to get off my chest. At the time, I was living pretty far out in the country. It was just me and my dog. No nearby neighbors, no passing traffic. Pretty much just quiet. I find that kind of isolation to be a little comforting, at least in most situations. Well, one night, I woke up at around 2 a.m. because the motion sensor light outside my house kicked on. That wasn't all that unusual on its own. Animals set it off all the time. But this time, it was different. I don't even remember getting out of bed consciously. It was like my body moved before my brain had caught up. I walked over to my window, pulled the curtain back just a few inches, and I stopped dead in my tracks. There was a man that I had never seen before standing at the end of my driveway. He wasn't walking by, out for an evening run, or even shifting his weight. He was just standing still while facing my house. It took me a second to register what I was seeing. My brain immediately tried to rationalize it. A lost person? Someone who might have gotten into an accident down the road. Someone who needed help. But he didn't move, not even an inch. He just stood there under the motion light until it eventually clicked off, and everything went dark again. Because I could no longer see him, I made my way back over to my bed, but I barely slept at all the rest of the night. My dog stayed alert too, pacing and growling at the front door like he sensed that something wasn't right. The next night, it happened again. Almost at the exact same time. Same man, standing in the same exact place. This time, I didn't wait. I called the sheriff's department. They sent someone out, but by the time the deputy got there, the man was gone. The officer walked a perimeter around my house, even shined a flashlight around in the woods by the tree line, but nothing turned up. He told me that it was probably someone passing through, maybe a prank, and that I shouldn't worry unless this man started to come closer. That didn't exactly sit right with me, mainly because of the way the guy stood there. Too still, too deliberate, and on 2 nights in a row? It wasn't like he was unsure of where he was or what he was doing. More likely, he meant to be exactly there. Every night that week, he came back, always between 2 and 3 a.m., always standing in the same spot. But on the 4th night, he stepped closer. It was subtle, maybe another 5 or 6 feet down the driveway, but he was definitely closer to the house than before. Enough so that I can now make out more detail. Dark jeans, heavy coat, long, greasy-looking hair that hung way past his jawline. The man never said a word. He never looked around. His eyes just locked in on the house. The following night, I installed a video doorbell. I knew that it didn't cover the driveway, but I wanted at least some kind of footage in case things were to escalate. I even got a secondary camera that I could mount on the porch. Well, night 5, he came even closer, this time halfway up the driveway. He stopped just outside the range of the porch camera, almost like he knew exactly where the camera's range would end. I stood by the window again, just watching him. He never took his eyes off of his usual staring point. He never fidgeted, just that same eerie stillness. The next night, I didn't see him through the window. I saw him on the camera. This time he had approached the porch, slowly, purposefully, and for the first time, he stepped directly in front of the door. He leaned in so close to the video doorbell that his breath even fogged up the lens. Of course, he didn't ring it. He didn't knock. He just stared into it, before turning his back and walking off. The next morning, I checked the footage again, just to be sure that I hadn't imagined it. And there he was, his face blurry in the low light, but close enough to make out tired eyes and chapped lips. I called the sheriff again, and this time they said they'd send someone to patrol the area for the next few nights. That didn't stop him from coming back again anyway. Same slow walk up the driveway. This time, he tried the door. I was awake, standing in the living room just beyond the door. I heard the faint click as he tested the handle, and my dog growled so low that it sounded like a tremor. That's when this man pressed his face to the window beside the door, and at this point, I was officially too afraid to move. I don't know if he saw me or not, but he stood there for more than a while. Minutes, maybe even longer, before once again turning away and walking off. That night's patrol didn't catch him. Either he knew how to avoid them, or he was just incredibly lucky. And that's when, just as suddenly as this whole thing started, it stopped. No more late night visits, no more motion lights, no more blurry faces in the dark. I would check the footage every morning. I kept waiting, but nothing happened. Days turned into weeks, then months. I never got an explanation. No arrests, no follow-up from the sheriff. My nightly visitor had just vanished. And to this day, I still don't know who he was or what he might have wanted. And I'm glad to say that I haven't seen him since. But I still live out here in the same house. Same dog, same Ring doorbell. Some nights when I wake up around 2 a.m. for absolutely no reason at all, I find myself walking to the window just to check. Because I feel in my gut that somewhere out there, that man might still be watching. So this happened a few nights back now. I live in the suburbs of Northern California with my parents in an upper middle class neighborhood. My parents are away for their anniversary, so I've had the place to myself for just about a week. So I got home from a late shift at work around 1 a.m. I head inside, shower, and I head to the kitchen to make some buffalo wings for dinner. I crack open a beer and sit in front of the TV. I was sifting through movies to watch on HBO Plus when, all of a sudden, my doorbell rings. It actually startled me to the point that I jumped off the couch, knocking my beer over in the process. It's now 2 a.m., and there was no good reason for anyone to be at the door at this hour. I just stared in the direction of the front door for several seconds before it rang again, followed by rapid knocking on both the door and the accompanying window. Now, for whatever reason, I was no longer scared, but more annoyed at the fact that some idiot would think it's an appropriate time to be banging on someone's front door. I head over to it, unlock the deadbolt, and pull the front door open, leaving just the chain in place. In the heat of the moment, I didn't think to look out the window first. I just yanked the door open. Well, standing on my front porch was a woman, around mid-20s, long, silky black hair, and a purple hoodie with black pants. I said, "Can I help you?" To which she responded with, "Yeah, sorry to bother you so late, but my boyfriend and I are having some car trouble, and our phones are dead. We were wondering if you could possibly let us use yours." She pointed up the street to a dark-colored sedan parked underneath the street lamp and said, "See, that's us right there." Now, had this been any other person, I'd have said no, but she looked innocent, like she was a college student. I live in a college town, actually, and it wasn't uncommon for college kids to be out late on a Friday night. I asked her where her boyfriend was, and she said that he walked to the gas station to see if anyone had a phone there. I pulled my iPhone out and told her to make it quick, as I was about to go to bed. She thanked me and said she'd only take 2 seconds. She took the phone and dialed a number and put the phone up to her ear. After a couple of rings, whoever she called picked up and she said, "Yeah, it's me. I'm borrowing someone's phone." She stopped talking and I could just barely make out a man's voice on the other end. Now, at this point, I start to feel a bit uneasy. She was taking a lot longer to be done with the phone call, and I started to get impatient. The whole time, she just stood there staring at me with a wide-eyed expression and this creepy half smile that looked forced, all while this person on the other end kept talking. She finally said, "Okay, bye," and handed me my phone back. As I was about to close the door, she then said, "Do you think I might be able to come inside to use your bathroom?" I said no and wished her good luck before shutting the front door. Right as I was about to walk away, I heard her laugh and say, "You made the right choice." I looked out the peephole and she was still standing on my porch, but now she had a man standing next to her. He looked to be around her age and was wearing a hoodie with a half pulled down face mask. The pair then started to circle around my house, banging on windows and laughing their hearts out. I didn't hesitate to call 911 at this point. They stuck around for a few minutes trying to get in through my back door. I had my Glock 19 in hand, aimed right at the door with 911 on speaker, and I was prepared to do whatever I had to do if they got in. They banged on that door for around 5 minutes before they finally left. I actually watched them run up the street to that same black sedan that I mentioned earlier and watched them take off. So much for car troubles, right? The cops showed up a few minutes later and took a report. They told me that I was the third person to call them that night, reporting a suspicious couple attempting to enter homes. I don't know what they had planned, but I'm inclined to believe that it was nothing nice. Moral of the story here is never answer the front door at 2 a.m., especially without looking out to see who it is first. I learned my lesson that night. While I've had a few close calls in my life, as many women do, this one still haunts me, as I'm usually hypervigilant. But I came up against a pro. This happened about 15 years ago now. We were living in a rental house in a quaint village in Southern California. While it was in a residential neighborhood, it was a few blocks away from the downtown village area. The area was filled with shops, restaurants, and bars, along with an active trolley station not far from a state college, Old Hollywood. There was always some activity going on, as our street was a cut through to the action. People coming and going, especially college kids. Even ringing our doorbell wasn't unusual. I was in the habit of jogging at night, but only with my German Shepherd Rottweiler mix, named Bear. He was an intimidating looking dog, although well trained, a former police dog and rescue. He had settled in well to domestic life. He was very friendly unless you either gave him a reason not to be, or he sensed something about you that was not right. He could not stand my ex-husband, for example, but he loved my current husband, so he was an amazing judge of character. His instincts were always dead on. Any attention I got after sundown jogging was almost always discouraged once they saw Bear, and wisely so. One night as I ran past the trolley station, this young goofy guy sporting a beanie, a lope, and who obviously had never run further than up to his weed dealer, tried to keep up with us while we ran. He kept asking where I lived, and if he could come over and give me a kiss. It was a bit comical, so I firmly yelled back for him to fuck off, and Bear dissuaded him by a short showing of teeth and a growl as we ran. Enough said. We never even had to break stride. When I got home, I told my husband. He scowled and suggested I check out the sex offender website and see if this guy was on there. The loping wannabe lover was not there, but I recognized someone I did have an experience with. I genuinely felt a chill run across the hair on my arms and up the back of my neck. It was the ficus plant guy who had stopped by the house just a few days before. Ficus plant guy was an older Hispanic man, tall and thin, dressed in a filthy gray work jumper with the name tag torn off. He had a gray white beard to match his jumper, and gray, greasy, unkempt, longish hair. This guy had leather skin and a hound dog expression. Every deep wrinkle on his face, of which there were many, bore a testament to an unpleasant life entrenched in misery. This was back in December of that year, drizzling early morning, and my husband had just left for work. Our house was set back slightly off the street, but still visible from it. There was an unlocked gate across the driveway about 10 feet from the back kitchen door. The kitchen door had a large glass pane, and next to it was a large kitchen window that ran nearly the length of the wall. It was bright and airy. I could clearly see out to the street, and any passerby could see into our kitchen, especially past the gate. I was in the living room, out of sight, having just poured my first cup of hot coffee. Bear was curled up in his bed by the fireplace, in full view of the kitchen window and door. Now, think Norman Rockwell. I heard a rattle of the kitchen door. I assumed my husband had come back, but wasn't able to get in for some reason. So I wasn't exactly alarmed, at least at first. But Bear absolutely seemed to be. I wondered why my husband didn't use his key. I realized that whoever was at the kitchen door chose to avoid the front door with a bell and had let themselves into and past the closed gate. Having done so, they could easily access the backyard and open the French doors where I was sitting. But who would do that? So I quickly got up to investigate. As I made my way to the door, I was surprised to see Ficus Plant Guy, who I'll refer to as FPG from here on out, who cut a sorrowful yet imposing figure pressed against our door, peering in through cupped hands. Bear had sprung up to his feet at this point and ran into the kitchen, getting to the door before I could get there. He was barking and growling menacingly. Incredulously, I spoke through the glass door to FPG, now feeling my spidey senses kick in because Bear wasn't going to back down. So I chose to not open the door at first. Instead, I asked FPG through the glass a haughty, "Can I help you?" Manifesting Eeyore, he asked if we had a ficus plant in our backyard. This threw me off at the time. I didn't even know what a ficus plant looked like, so I told him, "No, I don't think so." There were no plants back there that weren't in the ground, and it was all very typical SoCal flora or palm trees. I was a little put off by the temerity of someone coming into our yard, past our gate, and jiggling our kitchen door as he hid, and initially, my demeanor was more terse and guarded, and try as I may, I could not get Bear to stop bark growling, which was now irritating me. But I returned Bear's unusual display of disobedience with annoyance and commands to be quiet, instead of paying attention to what it really meant. My bad, Bear. FPG was unaffected by my vicious beast and my tone, so he persisted. His pursuit of the ficus plant was as determined as it was touching. The plant, it seemed, belonged to his dying mother, who he claimed had once lived in this house. She had left it behind, but it meant a lot to her, and he was hoping he could retrieve it for her. I told him again there was no ficus plant in our backyard, none that I was aware of. Is it potted or hanging? He couldn't tell me. Is it a mature plant? He didn't say. Does it flower? He was now losing patience. He just wanted me to either let him in or give him permission to explore the back. Eventually, I began to feel sorry for this guy. He was sort of a pitiful figure, and I didn't want to appear callous or prejudiced because of his ethnicity or disheveled state. So that's when I went to open the door. In a fury never seen before or again, my black and tan 90-pound dog threw himself at the doorknob, knocking my hand away and knocking me off balance. "Bear," I shouted, "be quiet." But he would have none of it. Ignoring me, he barked like he was a German POW guard dog, spotting runners at the wall. Showing teeth and snarling, I once again moved Bear aside and told him to go to his place. Indignant and growling, he slowly edged towards his bed, backwards, never taking his eyes off FPG. I apologized and tried to get more information from him, sincerely wanting to help this sad specimen of humanity before me, but it was hard to hear him through the glass. So once again, I went to open the door. He had even pulled the screen door open. He no longer seemed a threat to me, more an object of pity. As I went to unlock the door and grasp the handle again, from behind me came a rolling, running, menacing ball of canine fury and hate, charging like a hound from hell toward fresh meat. Mongrel barks shot out in a cacophony of rapid succession. With snarling, snorting teeth, Bear knocked my hand away and me to the floor. He threw himself against the glass, barking and snapping at FPG through it, sure to tear him to shreds, but for the few inches of tempered glass between them. I was shocked, angry, and apologetic all at once. FPG was unfazed, completely ignoring the beast before him. I was as much unnerved by FPG's lack of reaction as I was by Bear's focused fury. At this point, I thought, maybe I shouldn't open the door. Yeah, you think? Once I got Bear down to a low roar, I suggested that FPG give me his name and phone number, and I would ask my landlord if such a plant had ever existed. If so, I'd call him and make arrangements for him to pick it up. While my hellhound didn't dissuade him, my request for his name and number did. Nope, he muttered, shaking his head as he made his way down the steps and out the gate. "It's okay, I don't mind," I responded. He said something in Spanish as he limped away with a little giddy-up across the lawn and down the street to his vehicle. A van. A blue, roughly hand-painted with a kitchen broom van. An old U-Haul with a blacked-out passenger window. Then, and only then, did Bear stop his tirade and jauntily plot back to his bed, tail up, with an air of mission accomplished about him. What the hell had just happened? I muttered to myself. Oh well, and now my damn coffee was cold. So imagine my surprise when a week later, when looking for a loping wannabe lover on the sex offender website, I happened across FPG. He had an unmistakable, unforgettable face and demeanor, and we had done the back and forth dance for about 15 minutes, so I got a good look. He was convicted, a sexual predator, in fact. Multiple arrests for talking his way into homes, no forced entry. Homes where a woman was their home alone. tying them up and having his way with them, brutalizing them in unspeakable ways, often with foreign objects, torturing them for hours on end. As of that moment, the police had no idea where he was, but his last known location was the village where I lived. But for my sweet, loyal, fearless, and fearsome, very, very good German Shepherd Roddy mix, Bear Dog, I would have gotten to know FPG much, much better that day. I'm guessing there was never any ficus planned. And no, let's not meet ever. So this story happened to me when I was 15 years old. I was a super lonely kid. My home life was in shambles. Mom was cheating on Dad and told me about it. And I had just started at a new high school the year prior where I didn't know a soul. Creating art quickly became my biggest coping mechanism, and to this day, I still love to draw. At the time, I discovered the website DeviantArt and started submitting my drawings every day. Through this, I made some friends online of all ages. Some very talented people were giving me positive feedback on my work, and this really inspired me. In my depression, I felt like DA was a safe haven of like-minded people who appreciated one another. For the first time in a long time, I belonged somewhere. I spent many hours talking to some regulars on the site. Even now, almost 20 years later, a few of them are still in my life, and I cherish their friendships. But this story is about someone who I never, ever want to meet. DeviantArt also allowed writers to submit their stories or poetry to the site. One day, I was on the front page and a poem caught my eye. It was more of an angry rant, actually, full of weird, twisted imagery and anti-Christian subtext. Sounds stupid, I know, but it was actually quite well written and funny, at least to my 15-year-old self. Being a very angry, depressed high schooler, I was drawn in and decided to check this artist out. Not only was he a prolific writer with maybe 100 poems and stories on his site, but this man was a very talented visual artist as well. He created amazing illustrations of weird, funny creatures. Some of them were a little sexual, like naked women, but most of them were more humorous or gross. His name was Tom. The combination of Tom's writing and visual art skills intrigued me. Even though he was 30 years old, I decided to send him a private message. We bonded. Soon, we began to talk on AOL Instant Messenger. I would look forward to talking to Tom every day and came straight home after school to connect with him. Chatting for 5 hours was a daily thing for us. In hindsight, my family probably wondered what I was doing, but they never said a thing. Anyway, isolating myself in my room wasn't abnormal at this point. I was so grateful for my artistic friend. I could be as dark and confident as I wanted when we talked. I unloaded a lot of my pain onto him, and he told me about his troubles too. Tom even started to write poetry about me. Happy poetry. It made me feel special, because I had softened this angry dude's heart with my friendship, or at least that's what I thought. He was reliable, and always online whenever I came home. After maybe 3 weeks of talking, Tom asked me for my phone number because he said he wanted to hear my voice. I was extremely uncomfortable with this and reluctant, but he insisted and gave me his number to call. Fearing I would lose a friend who was so important to me, I finally gave in. I should mention that I'm about 35 now, and I'm still a shy person, but at 15, I was painfully awkward and detested phone calls. My heart was racing, and I was shaky and sweaty as the phone rang. Tom picked up. "Hello?" My voice sounded shaky. Tom spoke. I knew his age, but to my relief, he sounded like a teenage boy. This made me feel less uncomfortable, but still a bit weirded out. I had no idea what to talk about, and for some reason, I felt like crying. Tom and I spoke for a while. He laughed at the awkward things I said, so I guess the conversation went all right. Honestly, I can't remember what we talked about, but what I do remember is that he barely spoke at all. We got off the phone and talked some more online. He said how happy he was to hear my voice. I was still pretty upset, but glad that I didn't disappoint him. I hoped he wouldn't ask me to call him again because it was such a stressful experience. But I had poured so much time into talking to this man that I was willing to be uncomfortable to preserve our friendship. My self-esteem at that point was pretty much non-existent. The next day, though, Tom wanted me to call again. On the phone, I could hear him breathing heavily. It was clear that he was touching himself. I talked about my day at school, some random thoughts that popped into my mind. He stayed silent, apart from the breathing. Then, when I was mid-sentence, he hung up on me. When I asked him what had happened over AIM, he told me I wasn't talking about anything sexy, something along those lines. I apologized and felt a total sense of failure. The conversation then turned sexual. I told him that I was a virgin. In reality, I hadn't even had my first real kiss yet. Tom was overjoyed by this. Now I really had his attention. At this point, it was May. Our relationship progressed to the point that I let him jerk off to my voice, and even sent him some pictures of me in my underwear when he asked. I had no idea what I was doing, but I felt like I had to obey him, or he wouldn't be my friend. He started to write poetry about taking a girl's virginity. To his fans on DeviantArt, they were just fictional poems about some fictional girl. But I knew they were really for me. This both thrilled me and made me queasy. My 16th birthday was coming up in June. Tom and I constantly talked about how badly we wanted to see each other. In the back of my mind, I really missed the days before everything got so sexual. I told him there was no way I could ever fly to Florida, where he lived. But Tom insisted on seeing me before my 16th birthday. Eventually, we picked a date. He found a hotel near my family's house that was relatively affordable, and even bought tickets to fly out. The plan was that I would skip school that day and spend the day with him so that he could take my virginity. I can't remember if he was even going to stay more than one day, to be honest. Before we said our goodnights, Tom wrote, "Will you let me get your ass too?" Not a question, a statement. I came home from school one day, and my mom was extremely solemn. She told me she knows about Tom. Apparently, I had remained signed in on AOL, but I think she actually got my password to see what I was up to. I began to cry, and I even defended Tom at first, but then I admitted I was terrified of him. I was so ashamed that my mom saw our sexual conversations, but she hugged me and told me, "He won't be coming, I promise." She emailed Tom, which really fucking spooked him. Tom began to yell at me and blow up my phone. He told me he spent $500 on the plane tickets that he couldn't get back. I never picked up any of his calls. He wrote me tons of emails in all caps. I even have a few of them saved. He wrote angry, violent poetry on DA about how I betrayed him. I was devastated, and I hated myself. On the day Tom was supposed to come visit, I stayed at my best friend's house, which was miles away in a totally different community. My mother gave our apartment building a photo of Tom to make sure nobody let him in. I was totally paranoid that he would pop up for a while after that, but he never did. He even stopped submitting all art and poetry. Over a month went by, and Tom was still MIA. My family and I went to Canada for a music festival. Life was slowly going back to normal, and my guilt was starting to fade. Suddenly, in our hotel room, my phone rang. It was Tom. I tried to pick up, and I can't remember why, but for some reason, since we were in Canada, I couldn't talk to him. I think it had something to do with the fact that I had an American service provider, or something like that. In any event, he left me messages. Now, my memory of this is pretty foggy. He may have actually been texting me, but I don't remember. A few days later, we took a train back to the US, and as soon as we crossed the border, I sent him a text. I apologized for what happened and explained that I was in Canada, but that I missed him and I hoped that he could forgive me. Tom told me the reason that he was gone for so long. He said that on the day he was supposed to come see me, he got very drunk and tried to take his own life. He stabbed himself all over, including his stomach, left hand, and legs. Feeling last-minute regret, he called his mother and she called the authorities. He told me that his whole apartment was considered a biohazard from all the blood, and after he recovered, he spent time in the psych ward. Tom had mutilated himself so badly that the hospital had to amputate his left leg, and he even lost 2 fingers. He told me unequivocally, this was my fault. I was utterly speechless, and my blood ran ice cold. I refused to believe him, but lo and behold, he uploaded some pictures of himself on DeviantArt. His leg had been taken above the knee, and he was indeed missing fingers. I had seen previous photos of him. This was my friend, all right. It's hard to explain how I feel about this situation. I feel sad for Tom, but I also understand that this wasn't my fault. I was a lonely kid and desperate for a friend. Tom was a schizophrenic man and a pedophile, as was later revealed by his explicit poetry about little girls. Eventually, he was banned from DeviantArt, and I never talked to him again after the age of 16. A few years ago, I looked him up and found his profile on a different site. Now, admittedly, I was Googling him to see if he was still alive. In his profile picture, he was next to a young woman with his hand over her mouth. It looked like he found someone who was willing to visit him after all. So Tom, while I hope you're okay, even 20 years after our first interaction, I'm still content to never meet you.